Good evening. This is the special meeting of the Architecture Board of Review to be followed by a regular meeting. So let's have a call to order. Mike, roll call.
Okay. Member Dittmer.
Here.
Member Kerouac.
Here.
Member Dahlman.
Here.
Member Waymeyer.
Here.
Members Callahan and Deegan are absent, and Chair Hunter, you're here.
Here.
Okay. We have a quorum of 5 present.
Okay, and that's where we're going to be, right?
Yep.
So let's see. We have the non-agenda items. We allocate time for members of the audience, virtual and non-virtual. The one that would like to speak to something that is not on the agenda, is there anybody that would like to do so?
And by the way, we should, the attendees, just hit the raise your hand button if you need to speak, and I can allow you to speak. Okay, no one is raising their hand.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on.
Okay.
To the first item of discussion, which is why we're having a special meeting, which is regarding the accessory dwelling units that has been under consideration by the PCZBA. Oh, no, I missed the minutes.
Right.
Yeah. How about the minutes? Anybody have any issues with the March 2nd Board of Review minutes?
No comment.
If there's no issues, then I'd like to have a motion to accept.
I move to accept the drafted minutes as submitted.
Second?
I second that.
Okay, we've got a roll call on this, right, Mike? Everything.
That's right. Yep, everything's a roll call. Member Dittmer.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Okay. Member Kerouac.
Aye.
Member Dahlman.
Aye.
Member Waymeyer.
Aye.
And Chair Hunter.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay, now we go on to the discussion regarding the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Who's going to lead that discussion?
Yeah, so our assistant to the village administrator, Glenn Cole, has been working with a consultant, Valerie Bernstein, and they've been working with the Plan Commission to come up with regulations that would allow accessory dwelling units with some restrictions, and I'll turn it over to Glenn Cole to introduce the item.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Hey there. Good afternoon, evening, maybe morning if this was a month ago. I'm not sure. It's so sunny out. My internal clock's a little off, but pleasure to be here with you once again. As Mr. Croak said, we're here to talk to you about the PCZBA's work on accessory dwelling unit regulations. In short, you know, if you're just tuning in, if you're just catching up on this, we're looking at these because making different housing choices has been a goal of the village since at least 1997. Since that time, we haven't done that good with that goal, to be quite honest. We've lost 2 units net in the village. We've had a lot of discussions about developments, but those haven't turned into units. And so we're trying to find different paths forward. And certainly this is one path where we know there is interest, where we know that supports single-family homeowners, that's consistent with the history of the North Shore of Lake Bluff. And so the PCZBA has been looking at how to make regulations that can fill these gaps. They've tried to do that in the framework of the village's existing bulk regulations, which have been designed over the course of 20-plus years very carefully. And trying not to upset that balance too much. The trick, of course, really the key issue that brings us to you this evening is about height. Ordinarily, an accessory structure in the village, if you were to build a detached accessory dwelling unit, not all of them are detached, but in this case, that height limit would be 17 feet. And so if you're a typical lot in the village, you'd like to have a garage, you'd like to have an accessory dwelling over a garage, which is a common form of constructing these. You can't really fit that practically in 17 feet. Certainly not with a sloped roof that you would expect in the village's residential areas. So the PCZBA in particular has focused on this issue. They've worked on this in July, August, September. We spoke to you a little bit about it in September, and we're really getting close, I think, to resolving the other issues, but we're still trying to make sure we've got this one right. So the PCCBA asked us, and we went out and retained Valerie Bernstein, who's both an architect by trade and is also a professional planner. She now has a municipal planning job, which is exciting. Most of the time I've known her, she's been in private practice and worked on some neat projects, but she's put together these prototypical ADU drawings that we shared with the PCZBA. They asked that we share some of the same information with you. And so we got Valerie here on short notice. Very grateful to her to give the same presentation again. She does have to leave at 6:30 p.m., so we are on a bit of a time clock for this first agenda item. So we'll turn it over to her. I'll jump in to talk a little bit at the end, but really, again, the two questions we're focusing on are around height, and really the questions we'd like your input on are, one, will this height exception just lead to good design about detached accessory dwelling units in rear yards when we're thinking both about height and that interaction with height and setback. I would also say a secondary issue too is the way that our height rules are written. An accessory structure ordinarily couldn't be taller than the principal structure. That may not be desirable. We know that it's going to be hard to build these in many areas of the village, and adding that restriction could make it even harder on lots that are big enough to make these work. Many of the larger lots in the village, for example, in the terraces, have single-story construction. So again, keep those two questions in mind, and we'll come back at the end of Valerie's presentation.
Thank you, Glenn.
All right. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Valerie.
Thanks, Glenn, for that great tee up. And I'm going to, Glenn, can you give me permission to share my screen?
You can do it right now, yes.
Okay.
Got 2 seconds ahead of me.
Okay, let me put this in presentation mode. As Glenn said, okay, there we go. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So as Glenn said, I've been working with him to help illustrate what the regulations that the PCZBA has been kind of kicking around, and I gave this presentation a few weeks ago to them. So I'm going to run through the same things with you with all of that stuff that Glenn has teed up for you to keep in mind. I don't know if you were as clued in on the ADU conversation as the PCZBA has been, but I know there was a lot of talk about the different forms that an accessory dwelling unit can take, which I think is really interesting when you think about all the different ways that they can be articulated. And what I was tasked with was kind of looking at what is the most impactful development that could happen on a lot. So really focusing on can we achieve a detached freestanding ADU on an existing lot? That was the task being that will have the largest impact on the neighbors and the built environment. So that's kind of what we were trying to achieve. A little bit about me. As Glenn said, I am both a licensed architect and a certified planner, and have a wide range of experience. Come from the East Coast and been in Chicago for a couple of years now, and I've done everything from entitlements on single-family residences up to master plans of 12 million square feet, and kind of go back and forth between policy and zoning and planning to detailing buildings. So keeping one foot in both of those. So this was really a great project for me to get to help out on. So Glenn gave me those draft ADU regulations, and I took that with the existing code, and we looked at a couple different prototypical sites, but really it was what is the impact if these draft regulations were to be official and allow people to develop ADUs on their property. And coming back again to why this is something that's being looked at, it's a great way to create high quality housing choices for families in the village in all stages of life and support the goals of providing more ranges of housing while preserving neighborhood character and reuse and restoration of existing resources. So I'm gonna walk through 3 different prototypes, and as we go through them, it's kind of like reading a lot of tables of math. So I want to guide you all through and make it succinct, but also not too dry. I like to, when I'm thinking as an architect and with my planner hat on, I like to think about what is going to be the largest restriction on a site. So that's kind of how I approach these. What is the lot coverage? Is there room to build anything more on the site? Then next, gross floor area. Am I maxed out on the FAR allowed? Then how big of a structure can I build and where can I locate it? So I've got those 4 topics on each slide in a table that we'll go through, and that will be for 3 different kind of clusters of zoning. So starting off, we're going to look at the E1, E2 zoning districts kind of as a cluster with similar scales of development, and those going into it kind of knowing it's going to be a lot more accessible to put an accessory structure on these larger lots. Then we'll move over to the terraces, the R2 and R3 district, and take a look at the impacts of a detached accessory dwelling unit there, and then wrap it up with the one that is the most challenging, which is the R4 district and kind of the trade-offs that come through that. And a little bit about how the methodology behind this. We did look at a couple of different specific sites and then created a prototype. So we needed something to base the numbers and the math and like run these tests on, but normalized a little bit to encompass the different conditions that we might see on adjacent neighbors, or to make it not so specific that a resident might see this and say, what are you doing to my property? So with that, let's jump into the E1 district. As I said, starting at that number 1, I like to take a look at the lot coverage calculations. And in this instance, we're working with a 66,000 square foot lot. The permitted coverage is 20%. So that means that you can build up to 13,230 square feet of building footprint on the site. With the existing home on the site, that's about 5,200 square feet. There's almost 8,000 square feet left that could be built out in terms of lot coverage. And then doing a quick check on, you know, of course, lot coverage isn't just about the building, but also the impervious coverage. There's a little bit more arithmetic there that verifies even with driveways and sidewalks and patios, there's still that 8,000 square feet of buildable area, of which could be an ADU. So then moving into the gross floor area calculations, again, starting at the lot where we figure out what the FAR is. The permitted gross floor area for this size lot is 10,215, and the existing total structure of the building is 7,000 square feet in floor area. So that brings us now to 3,130 square feet that an ADU could take up. So you see how we're kind of working downwards from the largest amount available towards now what we could build from for an ADU. The next one, number 3, is looking at what is permitted by those draft regulations in terms of the size of an ADU. And the first kind of pass is that an ADU would be permitted at 40% of the principal uses gross floor area. So 40% of that 7,000 of the existing building would be a 2,800 square foot ADU. But there is actually a cap in the proposed regulations that would say 1,500 square feet is the largest that you could build in that E1, E2. So that's actually the largest size that you'd be able to put on this lot. Next, I take a look at the setbacks from the property line, and being a very large, gracious lot in the estate districts, there's in theory a lot of areas on a site when you're just looking at it in plan that ADU could be located, and taking into consideration the daylight plane, which would be placed at the rear and the side properties, but the setbacks here are so great that in the E1 and E2 districts. So looking at that three-dimensionally on the site, you can see the overall height, the impact of the daylight plane, and in fact, with this example, because there were 1,500 square feet to play with for an ADU, I went and made that a two-story one as an example of somewhere that you might actually get 2 floors. You know, grandma and grandpa or your kids coming home from college living in their own little apartment on the site. So I think some of the considerations to keep in mind for these districts are that a lot of the existing properties do have steep topography or a lot of existing heritage trees on the site. So those features will actually be more limiting than the lot coverage and the bulk and mass itself. That would be challenging if a property owner has a steeply sloped and wooded site. Some of those newer estate sites being developed are kind of where this is pulled from, that have a bit more of flat property. So we were able to max out kind of anything that the regulations would allow, going up to a 24-foot overall height, 20-foot mean height. That gross floor area of I was just under 1,500 and 2 stories detached.
Valerie, if I can just
Yes.
jump in for one moment before we
Yeah,
move
go
on.
for it.
So some comments we heard from the PCZBA that I just note here as you're reviewing this, considering it. One, we didn't show like the worst possible extreme, if you would. So again, I note that ADU could be further towards the property line than what's Valerie has shown. So just understand that. The second, I think also important to note, with a structure this big, with a structure that's over 1,000 square feet, this structure is subject to the principal setback requirements. An accessory structure, so a shed, a garage, something like that, that's smaller than 1,000 square feet, has more permissive setbacks. That's why we have that daylight plane-esque rule that tries to move taller houses, taller structures, I shouldn't say houses, accessory dwellings, more interior to the lot. But just understand that, again, these ADUs aren't shown in the most extreme spot possible, and smaller ADUs, as you'll see in these coming examples, can be placed even closer to the property line. So
yeah, that's a good point. And in this one, you know, I was taking a totally open lot. In reality, imagine you have stands of trees somewhere, or some of those topographical features that might start to dictate where you would site that unit as well. All right, so let's jump into the R2, R3 zoning district. Going back to that number 1 spot, of course, here the lots are considerably smaller than the estate district. So a typical lot area of 10,345 with a 30% permitted coverage gives us 3,100 square feet of building area that can be covered. And the existing building here is about 1,500 square feet. So that means they could build up to 1,500, give or take, more building on the site. And then again, doing that check against the impervious coverage total, which is 50%, you know, you can see at the bottom line there, remaining impervious surface is greater than that building area. So we'll be okay even when factoring in driveways and sidewalks and patios. The gross floor area, moving to number 2, the lot area, again, 10,345, are the permitted gross floor area taken from the FAR regulations is 3,870. And the existing house on this lot, or this prototype, is 1,516. And actually, you'll notice that that's the same as its building footprint. So we're working with a 1-story building in this case. And the R2 and R3 are really a mix of existing ranches and houses that I think have been popped up over time. So that means that the gross floor area available for an ADU is just over 2,000 square feet. And you'll see that, of course, the remaining buildable area is less. So, you know, it's kind of these tables work in check with each other, checks and balances, so to speak. But once we move on to number 3 and take a look at the maximum size permitted on this site for an ADU, again, we apply that 40% of the principal use rule, and that comes out to be 606 square feet as the maximum size ADU for the site. And so even though the gross floor area for the site could go up to 2,100, we're limited to 606 square feet because it has to be no more than 40% of the principal use. So now that I know I'm working with 600 square feet, let's see where that would be located on the site, taking into consideration the setbacks, and actually more importantly, the daylight planes, which when those structures get taller play a role. And in this site, I want to point out there were, as I looked through that, the terraces, there are some really nice older trees. I could imagine homeowners saying, I don't want to cut down my really great shade tree in the backyard. So thinking about how a new structure might get tucked in around some existing trees as something to keep in mind. It's developing in these great neighborhoods with some character to them. So then looking at that in 3D, as I said, the prototype site is a 1-story, but you can see that, for instance, the neighbor next door has a 2nd story. It's kind of a mix throughout. And here we're sitting on that setback line, and within, it's just a 1-story ADU, in this case, those 600 square feet. So sitting within the daylight plane, I think it could be pushed over a little bit more to get that kind of worst case scenario, encroaching on your neighbors sort of feel, but adhering to the principal building's setback lines were clear of the daylight plane. So here in the R2, R3, with an existing 1-story structure that would have its own attached garage, we were able to fit in a detached 1-story ADU. And again, well within the regulations on height. Think of this just as, it could be open inside or typical 8-foot ceiling. Reading my notes here. Okay. So those were the easy ones. Let's dive in on R4, which is a bit more difficult. So I'm going to preface this by saying that in order to develop an ADU in an existing R4 site, I think a homeowner would have to make some compromises and probably give up some things that they already have. Or in this instance, for the prototype, for the goal of kind of trying to push the limit on what might be achievable in the district, we're really threading a needle and working without a budget, let's say, to show how it could be possible. But in terms of creating that detached accessible dwelling unit on the site, it's pretty tough. So I'll show you how I got there, but a lot, I think things that are much more feasible is maybe converting existing space within the building to be your in-law suite, or building above something that you already own. But let's walk through that, and I'll probably hit upon it more as we go. You can see the lot coverage calculations get a little bit more in depth here. 6,250 is that really typical lot size in the R4 district. 30% permitted building coverage leaves us 1,875 square feet of building footprint on the site. This particular site, the prototype was derived from the existing building coverage. There is a principal house and then a detached garage. So as I worked through this, the principal building with the existing accessory structure fell into an exclusion where we could take 330 square feet out of that and get an adjusted building coverage. From that, the remaining buildable area is 531 square feet. But I'm going to skip ahead really quickly and say, as I got into looking at gross floor area calculations and setbacks and all these things, this was really an iterative process. What I came to realize is that because of the daylight plane and building up above an existing garage, the whole thing would have to be torn down and moved. So the lot coverage calculations kind of looked at the existing conditions, but the need to meet the exact existing conditions kind of evolved while moving through these tables. On the R4 district, it was also especially important to look pretty closely at the total impervious lot coverage, which is about twice as much as just the building itself. But on some of these lots, there is a lot of driveway and front porch, and people have patios, great outdoor spaces built out. So it's starting to really pinch down the amount of total impervious buildable area, and that triggers one of those compromises that if a homeowner really wanted to create the accessory dwelling unit, it might mean giving up some patio space or making a driveway or walkway out of an impervious surface, some of those trade-offs to make it work. So let's jump into the gross floor area. Again, the lot size is 6,250, and the permitted FAR, or the GFA, as this one's actually the most straightforward FAR, it's a 2,500 square foot floor area permitted for the lot. And here, thinking about, that existing garage is going to go away, so I'm only taking the gross floor area of that house. It's 2,030 square feet. So that means what's left to build is 470 square feet. Now, hopping pretty quickly, I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit more in depth, but let's move on to the maximum size for the ADU. With a house of 2,000 square feet, 40%, the maximum ADU per the regulations is 812 feet, but because of the total available GFA, we're actually looking at 470 square feet. And I want to talk about one of the exclusions here. So this assumes that the existing detached garage will be removed and then reconstructed with the ADU above it. And when we do that, as part of the draft regulations, the gross floor area of the garage on that ground floor would be excluded from the total gross floor area calculation. So it's really, like I said, threading the needle to find a way to make this possible. And again, part of the idea of the existing garage would have to come down really came into play when looking at the daylight planes. So I have the setbacks dashed in here on red, and you see it kind of seems a little bit weirdly located on the site because I had to keep pushing it around to figure out exactly where it could fit, and also keeping it in the rear 25% for, I guess that other exclusion doesn't come into effect. So we talked about exclusions, and then looking at it in 3D. So this is where you can see I'm really kind of kissing the corner of that daylight plane on the side to side, and being a two-story. So this is where the ground floor would be your garage. You'd have some stairs leading up, and then your second floor would be that accessory dwelling unit. And it's pretty tough to achieve. I did look at a number of different sites, and even in the Axon view here, you can see some of the neighbors have really built out their lots a lot. I would say they have no more FAR to build out. So it was a very conscientious study of those existing sites to find one for the prototype that would actually reach the potential of a detached accessory dwelling unit.
And Valerie, if I could jump in here
again
for just
it.
one moment. So on the you don't have to go back, but on the previous slide we did note, did catch afterwards, the setbacks are drawn in a little bit more interior than they would be. I think the daylight plane really is more instructive here as to where you can actually put it. Valerie, if you actually go back to the Axon view.
Yeah.
So you can see that the daylight plane laterally on the lot really dictates the location versus that rear setback. Again, we haven't tweaked it to find the math. You could probably go a few feet closer to the property line. So just a note there if you're envisioning worst case scenario.
And I mean, if you want to talk a different type of worst case scenario, I think I've been looking at all of these with that traditional gabled roof, but if you got somebody who wanted to build a flat roof and put a garage and an ADU and then a really nice roof deck on top, Glenn, I didn't even dig into the regulations of if that would be allowed, but the location of this is really dictated by the setback planes and the height of the gabled roof. If it were flat, you could potentially push it further and maybe put occupiable space on top. So something to think about.
Can I ask a question? As long as you're talking about daylight plane, does the daylight plane affect, now that you have two buildings on the site that are actually residential buildings, does the daylight plane affect each other as opposed to just your neighbors?
Oh, it is not applied that way. So I think typically, and Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically the daylight plane is just at the rear of the lot for your principal structure. But for the ADU specifically, one of the draft regulations is that it would also apply on the sides, but it sits on the lot line, which you can not tell from these drawings. But it sits on that property line. So there is no daylight plane that would be applied between them.
Okay.
Yeah, Chairman Hunter, I would say, yeah, to your question, so here in Lake Bluff, they come off the side yards ordinarily, but not the rear yard. Yeah. As you know.
Oh, I got it in the reverse. Okay.
It's fine. The rear yard here is really just to make it function as a sliding height setback. You could probably use a simpler rule to get to the same result. But there's there's nothing affecting that between the principal and the accessory. I'm looking here. I know somewhere either in the building code or in the zoning code you're going to have some minimum separation between those two buildings, but unfortunately I don't have that handy.
You would have that by your building code, because if you get too close, then you're going to have to put fire-rated walls in between, which just drives up the cost of construction.
Yeah, that's a minimum 3-foot setback.
Oh yeah, I did look at that at one point. So these are kind of the last few slides that are here more as aids for questions and discussions. I have kind of walked through all the things that I had to present, and I'm happy to answer questions or move through the slides while you all have discussions.
Okay, who's got questions? Somebody jump in?
I have a noisy dog, so I'm trying to stay muted. Sorry about that. So, are there areas around here, similar communities, that have adopted these ADUs?
Yeah, so one of the questions the PCCBA asked us was to give them a current update on that. That's something we'll plan to do at their meeting in April. Certainly a lot of communities in our area are talking about this subject. Lake Forest has some ADU regulations on the books that's principally designed to control existing ADUs in town and try to get a handle on them. I wouldn't really say that they're designed to allow new ones to be built. Certainly closer to the city, Chicago, Evanston, Oak Park, others have permissive regulations that allow new ones to be built and that have been, I would say, growing more liberal over time. In between, I believe either Wilmette or Winnetka allows them. Again, not completely positive. We haven't finished researching that yet. But certainly I think Highland Park and others are looking at this issue again, as we're all confronting really shared issues on the North Shore with especially an aging population, but also making choices for other people that aren't well served by single family homes.
And I just want to remind members of the public who are on here that if you want to speak on this item, just press the raise your hand button down at the bottom of your screen, just right of center, and I'll give you the ability to speak if you would like to. Thanks.
Neil, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Glenn, when you're doing the study of what other communities might be allowing, I wonder if it would be possible to also find out how many of them have been done. Sometimes a community might allow it to happen, but nobody does it because the restrictions might be too tight or too difficult to live with. Others may have restrictions that are very livable, and people go ahead and do it, or maybe people don't do it at all. So I wonder if that could be included when you do the study of other communities.
Certainly.
Yeah, and I think, because I did one of these in Evanston. I was doing a project in Evanston, started allowing coach houses. And I think in a community that has alleys, I think this is a easier kind of building type to allow. Where I am, I'm looking at my back patio door. I have 5 backyards. I'm on one end from the corner. And, if all 5 of us decided, or all 6 of us decided to do this, it would be a jumble mess, in our community. With alleys, you're kind of creating that buffer between rear yards and I think that's a distinction we need to look at when we look at other communities and how they do it. Oak Park is an alley-based community. Evanston is. So I don't think that's a fair comparison to where we are. But I think that's going to be an important distinction between how those are applied and how we would apply ours when we're all mostly abutting up backyards to backyards in a lot of these communities and subdivisions.
Somebody else?
Bob, I have 4 items that I might bring up with this. Some of them are related to the presentation, and others are just to do with the documents that we were given. I thought when I first read it through, and Valerie, when you just gave us the presentation, I just came across with the impression that it's more complicated than it needs to be, and that I wasn't sure that I understood. Maybe there's a good reason for this, but I wasn't sure why the existing lot coverage and gross floor areas couldn't just govern the situation, and it just says it's either in 2 houses, or it's in buildings, or it's in one building that's connected. So I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just throwing out a question. A second issue, not related to your presentation, but something in the rent controls said that if you have a renter in there, he cannot rent the ADU if it exists. And I'm not sure I understand the rationale behind that one at all. And an example for that might be my aunt, who's 94 years old and lives in Kildare. She's recently been moved into a nursing home, but she's alive. The kids are going to rent the house out, but according to this, the renter would not be able to sub-rent the ADU, and that just doesn't seem to make sense. So I don't understand why that condition would be there. Another one is if the principal home was demolished, then the ADU can only be put in use for 1 year. Well, if it's a large enough one that it could be up to, let's say, 1,500 square feet, that's large enough for somebody to live in. So what if a property owner decides that they want to demolish the principal house and they want to live in the ADU? But according to what I read here, they can't. They have to demolish it. So that's another question to throw out. And the last question I've got is I see a lot of stuff on the internet about tiny homes, and so many of them that I see are on wheels. What do you do when somebody just takes a tiny home that could be like this and just wheels it up and puts it in their driveway toward the back of the house? So I don't recall seeing any consideration here about that. I'm sure we do have some restrictions regarding what you can do, like with mobile homes or things like that, but maybe that would be considered. So that's all I had.
Anybody else?
Chairman Hunter, I can answer some of Neil's questions now, or we can wait till the end. Your choice. Or Member Dahlman, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead and talk to Neil's questions.
Sure. So Member Dahlman, I think all great questions. I'll answer them briefly, and feel free to jump in. So the first, if you're seeing complexity in what Valerie's talking through, really that's the PCZBA, I would say, shares your view, which is not to make this overly complex. The philosophy in drafting these has been let bulk be bulk, if you would. Aside from just this narrow height restriction, these aren't treated any differently than, from a bulk perspective, than ordinary structures. There's a couple rules in there governing the overall size to keep them from being really big compared to the actual house on the lot. That's about it. It's not any more or less favorable as far as floor area, as far as impervious, as far as anything like that. And so I hope that isn't lost in this outline. As far as renting, a concern we heard from the PCZBA, and something common in other communities, at least in Illinois, is this idea that an accessory dwelling unit is supposed to be accessory to the main house. So of course, why would you let anyone not related to the owner live there? Well, that has some problems. That's difficult to enforce. Really, I would argue it makes an ADU a disamenity. I mean, if you build one, it can really only be used by a very narrow segment of people. But I think the concern is real, which is that we want, if you allow these units, you don't want to have two completely separate families living there, perhaps. I mean, that's understandable. And so there's a lot to balance between what can you do inside of one house today, how do you balance having two, how do you make something that works in the market, but still keeps that single family character. And so the rule you're seeing there is really just, unfortunately, I think your kids would fall on the wrong side of it, or the example you provided is, if an owner lives there, they can rent out the ADU. If the owner lives in the ADU, they can rent out the principal house. Of course, related people could live in both, but we're trying not to be in a situation where two completely separate parties have no contractual or familial relationship with each other, where one landlord contracts separately with two parties to be in the two different units. We thought that was, in drafting it, and I think the PCZBA in reviewing it has thought that that's a good compromise in trying to make something practicable around the relationship between those parties. And also it preserves something I think really important, which is that if you have a problem living arrangement there, you are the closest person to it, and you are the person most inconvenienced by it. And I think there's something to be said for that. On principal and accessory use, right now, if you were to tear down the principal structure, there's an argument to be made that we can and should be requiring you to tear down the other structures at the same time. What you're seeing here is actually making our rules more permissive. At least in our first look legally, the thought would be if that were to happen, what you described, that accessory dwelling unit would just become the principal structure. It's a bit murky. It could be cleared up in drafting, but certainly our goal is not to make people tear down good housing. And then tiny houses, this is the first we've talked about right here in response to your question. So I haven't looked closely at that. I would say the village's ordinary zoning and building codes apply. Mike Crow might be able to speak better to that, but I don't think we would treat that any differently than if you were to try to put a manufactured house in the village as the principal structure.
Can I ask a non-architectural question? If I rent,
I like those more.
If I rent out my ADU, do I have to provide a parking spot on the lot because we can't park overnight? What's the parking regulations with these?
Yeah, no special parking regulations with these. I mean, certainly some people that will live in an ADU will not have a necessity for parking. You can't park on the street overnight, so you're going to have to find parking for them somewhere if they have a car. I presume it would be part of your relationship, your negotiation, that you find an acceptable situation for them to park. Another good reason why we're trying to keep an owner involved in some way when you have another renting party. And that I will say some communities do require the additional parking spaces to be provided. Partially in the communities that have been doing this, you see them moving away from that because in those communities, and certainly in Lake Bluff, that tends to promote the creation of impervious surfaces, the creation of parking spots that may not be necessary. And again, some of these populations just don't have cars.
I have a couple of questions. one is and I know this has been on the books for years now, is the 10-foot rear setback, which I've always objected to. I think that's neither here nor there. But the other question, or one of the other questions, is 1,500 square foot maximum. There's houses in this town, some of the Harlan ranches, that are just barely, not even quite just 1,500 square feet, and as they are, they're very livable houses. And so that seems like it's a little excessive, unless you've got a family of 6 people or 5 people in there, which I don't think is the intent here. When we would vacation, we would spend 2 months in a unit that was 750 square feet, 2 large bedrooms, and the only thing that's small was the kitchen. But it was certainly livable, and that's half what we're talking about here. So I think 1,500 is maybe on the large side. And the other one regards roof height, and I don't like the idea of messing around with means, and let's just establish a maximum of 24 feet. If it's, and the other thing is, not everything is going to demand a gable roof, and so if we were to put into a code that everything is a sloped roof, I think that'd be a mistake, because not every house in town is that way, even though the majority of them are. So I think however this ends up being written in terms of the actual building part of it, I think we need to look at a few more options. And Valerie did mention that, whether it's a roof deck up there or not. But I think the other thing is we need to think hard about who the target people are that would use this. And the idea of the second floor above a garage is great unless you're 80 years old. And then it becomes problematic. That's why people are trying to get out of their 2-story houses so they don't have to do stairs anymore. So, and how big does it have to be? If you've got a college student or a pair of college students that you're renting out to in some situation, or your own children who are going to school, there's just a variety of things, but we don't try and do everything for everybody. We're not trying to build 2-family houses on the property, I don't think. So that's kind of my comments that I have, I think. And I don't know if they require a response or not. Anybody else?
I have a couple things I wanted to ask, or maybe, I don't know, again, maybe they're not questions to be answered now, but when it comes to the process of how it would work if somebody wanted to put one of the units in their on their property, is that going to be a process that has to go through the zoning board, or is it going to just be allowed once you meet the requirements? And then what about when it comes to appearances? And I think this kind of does tie back to the roof deck option of, how is it going to have to be complementary to the house? And I guess I don't know what that looks like as far as adding those additional structures, but will this have to be, go through a different approval so that there's opportunities to get eyes on it to make sure that people aren't doing something that ends up meeting code, but it doesn't work for the community? And I think part of that also is kind of what Matt had said about if everybody in his neighborhood put one of these structures because they could and it was allowed by code, it's going to start getting real messy, and where, can they do that? If it's allowed, can they all put them back there? Or are there other sorts of requirements and regulations that they're going to have to go through? And I think that's pretty much, that's it.
Sure. I guess to answer the first part of your question, I interpret these both as questions. Is that right, Julie? Fair to say?
Sure. If you have answers to them, I don't know if you're the right person to answer those questions, or if you have that whole process down and what that looks like and the documents that need to be filled out for getting an approval. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let me answer it like this, and you tell me if it makes sense. So that both, I think, have been topics of interest in the PCZBA's discussion. Certainly the first one I wouldn't say is a settled matter, but at least right now the direction we've been given, the draft, is that this is as of right. If you meet the requirements, you can construct the unit. We have very few special uses, which would require something to go to the zoning board. In residential property in the village, trams are one, residential pool houses are another. I would say generally those are somewhat uncommon. But you know, one viewpoint expressed at the PCZBA was, you know, if we have all these standards, what is there to look at? If something meets the standards, it should be good. And then also, I would say perhaps something you all would be sympathetic to as board members, of course. Some of these are very personal situations. I mean, I can tell you, I've been in communication with one individual who's been watching these regulations because his mother is currently living in his home office, and he wants to know when he's going to have the opportunity to build one of these units. And I would ask the PCZBA, and I'd ask any of our volunteers if they'd want to face that choice, politely put. I think that's a very difficult situation, and one of the things I'd be mindful of is how you handle processes that are sensitive like that. The design complementary to the house is a simpler answer, maybe. Just as bulk is bulk, quote unquote, as it were. I think the PCZBA's philosophy has been, and we haven't had a great deal of discussion about this, but certainly there's no residential design review in the village, not for principal structures, not for secondary structures. There has been, you know, if you have a special use, would you look at that? Has been part of that discussion, but I don't think that there's necessarily been an interest in adding that new dimension to this particular enterprise, if you would. But certainly, if you think that's if the ABR thinks that that's something that should be considered, I'm happy to take that back. I would add the asterisk that certainly this group is the village's design experts, and so I think you know, from a zoning standpoint, of course, the zoning board could hear it. If there's desire for a design review, I think not only would you guys be recommending it, I think, you know, you would be the board that would have to administer it. So that would be, I think, my reactions to your comments. And certainly, I'll mention too, I'm writing all these down. We'll share all these with the Plan Commission when we next bring this to them.
Could I ask you a couple more non-architectural questions? And maybe this is looking at other communities that have done that. So if these have like a separate address, like a separate mailbox, so like is the mailman now walking in your backyard to deliver mail? And then do you have separate gas and water meters? You know, is it a totally separate structure on the lot, or is it tied in with your utilities? I'm sure a client of mine would ask all those questions, so I would ask that of what is going to happen, you know, with that situation.
Yes. My understanding is that the village code and the utilities would require separate services from that standpoint, so I think that's easy. A separate address is a nuanced question. I mean, I think for 911 dispatching purposes, it would get one. I mean, you know, and certainly that's in commercial structures and residential structures, that's not the most unusual thing, but we haven't, I confess we haven't looked as closely at the addressing issue as we have the utility issue.
And you'd have to have separate utilities. That's part of the requirement. So if you've got your maxed out side setbacks, you're going to have to figure out how to get your water and your sewer back there to have those for that piece, that separate structure.
I don't know if it's required by the Illinois Plumbing Code. Mike, it's been a while since we looked at this. You might remember, but I think the village code would just require separate metering as it is today. That's not to say if that's a local requirement, we couldn't change it.
I just want to chime in and add in the caveat that I think all of the conversation has still been around just like that, the freestanding one, so the freestanding ADU. So when it comes to concerns about, I don't think it would apply. Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong. If you were to convert like your basement or you've got an attached garage that doesn't have a second floor, like there are still those other methods of getting your accessory dwelling unit that might not be as onerous as putting that freestanding detached one. We've just been really zooming in on the most challenging, but for lots that might not, or homeowners that might want to look at it in a slightly less challenging way, they could always do like something attached and probably get around some of those challenges.
Matt, were you done? I have 2 more questions.
I'm done. Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Maybe I just don't know the answer to this one. You can only have one structure. You can't have 2 separate structures or 3 structures as long as they don't add up to the same, amount of square footages and all that, right?
Yes. So remember Waymire, one of the things the PCCBA looked at early on was on these really big estate lots, do you allow multiple ADUs? I'll tell you that by variation, they did approve a very large lot up in Shore Acres recently that does have 2 on it. But these regulations, and I think their consensus is just that if you're talking about one ADU on a lot, whether that's attached, detached, whatever, you get one bite at the apple.
You could have one over the garage and then also have one in your lower level?
That's correct.
Okay. And then my other question is, and Valerie, maybe this is something you did look at, kind of as the worst case scenario. When you think about some of the research that you did, and the concern is always that someone's going to go and they're going to do what they can to maximize it, and it's going to not really meet the intent of what we want to do and what we want to see and see what's happening. Did you explore it kind of that backwards way, like you're like the bad guy and you're coming in and you're going to say, I'm going to do everything I can to make the worst thing on this piece of property and make the worst for my neighbors, but it's allowed by right, so I can do it? Did you look at it that way? And if you did or didn't, would you have any examples of things where you have concerns that if we approve the code the way that it's written, or go forward with this, what could some of the problems be that we could end up seeing?
I guess I'm too much of a rule follower. I tried to max out what is the biggest impact you could have on a lot, but by following the rules. And I think if I were to be that devious homeowner, I'm trying to think right now through my head, a crazy architectural design for sure. But the R4 zoning, I think by trying to show that it's possible to get a detached ADU in there was about as bad boy as I could get. But the idea that I floated out earlier that I think just came to my mind while giving this presentation, that if you were to have a flat roof and make a really sweet party deck on top of there, and now you have an ADU, but maybe you're not really leasing it out and it's just your little weekend getaway in the back of your yard. I think that to me seems like one of the most disruptive forms that this could take. But otherwise, I was really focused on playing within the rules, and I think the daylight planes were most limiting. So if I wanted to get around that, I would put on a flat roof, push it as far as possible into towards my rear property line. And then something that hasn't really come up is maybe windows and doors. If it might not be in the best interest of the property owner, but what if you put a huge window or a garage door from your living room that is 3 feet from your neighbor's property line? I didn't get into that nuance of the building code either, but I guess those are some of the things I would start to think about of ways you could really push the boundary in a less savory tenor. I'm going to keep thinking about that. If I come up with anything, I will email Glenn and let him know.
All right, thanks.
I think Mickey Callens wanted to speak on this item, so go ahead, Mickey, if you'd like to talk.
Oh, hi. Well, I think it's just about time for Valerie to leave, so I'm going to be real quick and just go to the one thing I really wanted to make, and it's kind of building on points Matt made. I mean, I thought he expressed my concerns very well. So Valerie, would you be able to go back to that slide where you show all the different options for ADUs that are possible? It's one of your first ones. Yeah, that one. Oops. There, yeah. Okay, so I mean, my reaction on this is that just within our current bulk rules, you can do basically all of these. It's not, the one that you're talking about is really, well, maybe that middle one that says above garage, if you imagine that split away, you know, and separated, kind of combined, detached and above garage. That's really what's giving everybody all this heartache or heartburn. And I just wonder why we don't just say you can do any of these options that are very possible within our current bulk rules, and just not do the coach house, which is really, you know, as Matt said, that is really more for the towns that have alleys. And it's just imagining that in the middle of the backyard of our relatively small lots, it's just a problem for me. And then Julie was talking about what might be the worst case scenario. I am kind of wondering, what about a tear down? If somebody did a tear down, would they kind of, you know, might there be an incentive to almost put like what's effectively a 60% allowed area house and a 40% allowed area house on the same lot? To me, that might actually be the worst case scenario. And that's all I had to say.
So just to, if I may, clarify, the regulation is 40% of the principal dwelling. So you can't build the 60% of your potential buildable space and then reserve the 40% of the total buildable space. It would have to be 40% of that principal. So I think that's working to limit.
I mean, what
that
would it
scenario.
be? What would it be for a tear down? Say we're doing a tear down. You have no more principal structure. How much could you build on each of the two structures then? Maybe I'm misinterpreting it.
Yeah, that's where the accessory nature of it really kicks in, that you have to have one structure that's a principal. You couldn't, at least the way I understand it, you couldn't just say, well, I'm going to make two little matchy houses on one site. You'd have to have your principal and then your accessory. That's 40% maximum of that.
Okay, well, that was how I was interpreting it. Okay.
Glenn, are we getting the information to you that you wanted?
Yeah, I think we're hearing a lot. We can work with Chair Hunter. Mickey Collins, I'm just doing this, Ms. Collins, I should say, I'm just doing this back of the envelope here. If you had a 6250 lot, 40% of that gives you 2,500 square feet to work with. By my math, you could have your split in that case would be looking roughly 72%, 28% would take you right to the line.
Oh, okay. All right. But I think there might be, that might be very appealing for people. I mean, we still have some tear down candidates, I would say, in town. So certainly on the terraces, we have a lot because they have a much bigger lots there and therefore much bigger allowed areas.
I guess, Chair Hunter, if I could, maybe I'd just ask your group for your sense of it. I think Member Kerouac's comments, Ms. Collins' comments are well taken, which is, we don't have to have that height exception, right? If the sense of the group is that it's practical to do this without, and Ms. Bernstein, I'm looking to you a bit too to comment on this, but if the sense of the group would be that you would share with the PCZBA that, we don't have to start with this, certainly I could take that feedback to them.
I don't know what you mean when you say we don't need to have the height exception. I mean, it
So-
would be,
You would not put in a special height exception of any kind. So for a typical residential lot, the height limit would be 17 feet flat, and you'd have to work with it.
That's if it's a detached structure, right, Glenn?
For a detached structure, that's correct. So attached, you could still put dwelling over garage or something like that.
well, that becomes easy, but to say it's just 17 feet, that precludes anything over a garage. That's just a structure that's got way too much ceiling height inside of it. I think.
I think in terms of the
Go ahead.
existing, yeah, I'm going to make one comment and then I got to jump. In terms of the existing massing of the neighborhoods, a lot, I'm thinking particularly in R2, R3, most of them have sheds or garages in the back that are similar in size to what I was massing for the ADU. So I think limiting that to the one story, it doesn't address necessarily the concerns about the difference of like an alley loaded type of community, but it would keep it on par with the other already allowed size of development there.
I think George Russell wanted to speak on this item too, so we could go to him. George?
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute. No, I just wanted to follow up on sort of the questions that Julie were asking and also Mickey Collins' comment. I too think it would be very, very valuable before we adopt any regulations that we do develop some worst case scenarios, because as I've pondered this over the last couple of months, I do think you can have some awfully aggressive structures in the rear yards. A 7,500 square foot lot, which is pretty standard. You can have a 800 square foot structure in a pretty tiny rear yard that can be 2 stories. Once you get out into the R2 and R3 districts, you can get even much larger structures. And I too, after working in the zoning field for 25 years, I've seen how talented architects and developers can be in stretching out every square foot of allowable development. And the 3 examples that were provided are nice examples. They do not illustrate by any means the worst case. And I think we need to be prepared for that, because I do think that developers, as member Mickey Collins also indicated, they could start coming in and building these combination units. And they can be pretty obtrusive in some of these backyard scenarios where backyards lead onto backyards. So I would encourage the thought that we should develop some worst case scenarios as a minimum to see what those worst case scenarios are, because in my view, that has not been done yet. Thanks.
I've got to jump off, so I just wanted to say thanks for having me and accommodating me in this time slot. And it's fascinating to be a part of the conversation and hear how you're all working through that. So, Glenn, we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Valerie. Great.
My pleasure. Have a good evening, everyone.
We're not done yet. Okay, are we taking a break? Or have we got more discussion on this?
I don't have any more on this unless any of the board members want to talk on this. We could go on to the next item, the streetscape, if you're ready for it.
Yeah, we can just move on ahead.
Okay. Well,
Jody there?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do a brief introduction here for item number 5, the Scranton Avenue streetscape improvements and alterations. We took the opportunity as part of our 2021 road resurfacing project we were taking a look at replacing curbs and resurfacing Scranton Avenue and replacing some of the old brickwork that's coming apart behind the curbs there. And we thought as we were doing that it would be worth taking a look at what additional streetscape improvements might be worthwhile doing along with that project. So we engaged Jody Mariano, the principal landscape architect with Tesca, who leads the firm's public place practice and who has recently done streetscape design for Wilmette and Winnetka, to help us take a look at that. And she has a presentation to give us. It's in your packet. Also, board members, you've received by emails 2 letters on this topic, one from Catherine Briand and another one from Mark Stolzenberg. And to the public, those letters have been added to the ABR packet online if you want to look at them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jody.
Great, thank you, Michael. And good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Jody Mariano, excuse me, Principal Landscape Architect with Tesca Associates. And may I share my screen?
I think you have permission to do that already. Yep.
Yep, let me just make it bigger. Give me one moment here.
Got it.
Okay, everyone's able to see that okay?
Yep.
Super. So thank you very much for having me. We were thrilled to have this opportunity to talk about your adorable, quaint streetscape in downtown with staff and with you all. Just a little bit of context as to how we came to this project. As Mike mentioned, there is a 2021 road resurfacing project. Staff had some conversations about potential on-street parking reconfigurations and approached us to take a look at Scranton Avenue, following up on those parking conversations. We took sort of a broader brush look at the parking as well as the other streetscape opportunities on Scranton Avenue, as well as this small portion of Center Avenue. Even though we're looking at this area only between blocks 2 and block 4, we are keeping our mind's eye on the other potential applications of streetscape improvements, including what might happen in the future in block 1. And who knows, if there was future redevelopment on block 3, there might be a version of that that takes place there. So we are focused on Scranton Avenue and that section of Center. However, we are keeping an open mind about how we could apply those things throughout. So one of the first things, that of course comes to mind is, not to mess up your really lovely downtown. We want to make sure that it retains its character and its charm. So, looking at the pattern of downtown, it is a fairly compact area surrounded by neighborhoods. It's very walkable. It has wonderful fests and events, as well as access to green spaces. Thank you to the folks at the ABR for participating in this little word exercise. We have an inkling as to what we think downtown is about, but it always helps to have your words. We asked 3 questions. The first one was, why is downtown Lake Bluff special? And you're, of course, welcome to read all of this, but some of the things that kind of bubbled to the top, things that had to do with the quaint architecture, the quaint feeling about downtown, the sense of gathering and pedestrian friendliness. It's a very welcoming environment that we want to continue to support. Along Scranton Avenue, we asked folks to help us think about what are the best things about Scranton Avenue that we want to make sure we don't lose. Things like the cafe tables, flower displays, the variety of buildings, and of course, we're not changing buildings as far as streetscape goes. There was also some discussion about street lamps, and so, that's something that we're keeping in the backs of our minds too. Come on, computer. Okay, so the last question was, if you could change something about Scranton Avenue, what would it be? Better crossings, bump outs, separating pedestrians from vehicles. I think that's an important thing. I really loved the comment that said something along the lines of less is more should prevail. And we couldn't agree more that streetscapes are relatively narrow spaces that need to accommodate a lot of things, parking being only one of them. but we want to make sure that we continue to make this very pedestrian friendly. And we also have an opinion that streetscapes kind of need space to breathe. They need to have that flow, that ability for storefronts and restaurants to spill out and allow cafe dining, sidewalk displays, sandwich boards. These are the things that bring life and vitality to the street. So with that, a diagram here shows some of the context and the functions today, just on Scranton Avenue. One thing that's important is that, we have this very active commercial frontage on the shady side of the street, unlike what happens on Block 1, where we have the commercial frontage on the sunny side of the street. So it's a very different kind of environment. Of course, the sunny side of the street is this north side of Scranton here. We've identified where all of the but the dining establishments are, the food and beverage places. And also the ways that people get into the downtown is important. So we've identified this intersection here at Walnut, Scranton, and Center is kind of your 100% corner. It's the way that visitors tend to enter into the downtown, whereas this east side of Scranton is more the place that the neighborhood tends to enter. So I think this is something to keep in mind, also in keeping with the comments that came through the emails about how do the neighbors, the people that are on foot or on bike, how do they enter the streetscape, and what is the view that they're presented with? Scranton Alley, of course, is a treasure, and we tell your great story about Scranton Alley every chance that we get, because it's such a great example about what just some very creative business minds plus a little bit of outdoor space can do for a downtown. So just a couple of things about existing conditions. The view looking to Block 1, again, very attractive sunny side of the street. We understand that there have been some issues over time with paving, the unit pavers, and so those would be things that could be corrected as part of the next phase of streetscape. This view looking east to Block 4, where Innovasi is, of course, this is a very desirable corner. It also happens to be a corner that has very little relative space available for people to sit outside and eat at Innovasi. So that's something that we've been looking at. There's also some sort of minor things that have to do with, curb ramps and ADA access and, areas where the lawn isn't really doing so well. And so those are things that we're sort of keeping in mind as we move forward. Bluffington's has a couple of tables on the east end. And then we were also kind of delighted to see that they're partnering with the church to have more outdoor spaces for dining. Something to keep in mind, we've talked about, and you'll see some examples about outdoor dining here in front of Innovasi. We could consider expanding a bump out to do the same for Bluffington's as well. So these are also some sort of minor, kind of technical fix-it type things that could happen in the streetscape. One thing that I wanted to bring attention to in the ABR comments that we received from you all was a comment about how lovely and quaint these light poles are. And we couldn't agree more. A suggestion, though, is that the way that these banners are attached to the light poles really doesn't do justice to these light poles. It's kind of a clunky attachment. We have some ideas as to how we can take your great banner program and mount them to a different type of a pole. So I'll show you that in a little bit. So I'm going to take you through some imagery as to the types of opportunities that we see, and then we're going to show you some concepts that show how we apply those images to the plan. So we heard that there was interest in string lighting, and we've got experience with string lighting from other communities. This image here at the top left is from downtown Evanston. This is a plan, what that looks like in Fountain Square. These are string lights that are set over just a sidewalk, a pedestrian area, so they can be a little bit lower, which does a really nice job of bringing the canopy down and making it feel a little bit more of an intimate space. On the other side of the coin, this example here is from downtown Kankakee, where those string lights span across the street. In those cases, when it goes across the street, it needs to maintain a little bit of a higher ceiling to meet the electrical code. So you lose that quaint feel, but you have this, this look of lighting. This is another example. If anyone hasn't seen Larimer Square in I think it's outside of Denver. It's really lovely. They have a combination of both. So they have the taller lighting over the roadway, but then when it comes over the sidewalk, it gets a little bit lower to accommodate that ceiling. The other thing that Larimer Square does, and I told Drew this, I would not recommend this anywhere else, I think, but Lake Bluff, but they tie into the building facades. Lake Bluff downtown is small enough, and there seems to be a lot of good public-private partnership that connecting string lights to the facades, if it was something that the owners wanted to participate in, potentially could be considered. So it's just something to keep in mind. Public seating areas, of course, there's a variety of those, but generally we agree that they should be situated in such a way to protect pedestrians from the street, so that whenever you're sitting with a great view and have some planting separation between the sidewalk and the street. So these are some examples, of seat walls, benches. This is sort of an elliptical planter / bench. This is kind of fun. This is in Wilmette Library, but it's a precast concrete seating pebble. And we just showed it here because Lake Bluff does have this really wonderful, new brand about, North Shore living, and I can't remember the motto, but it incorporates sort of access to the beach and kind of this casual lifestyle, which could tie in well to things like large pebbles, for instance. We were not asked to look at fountains, but since we were looking at opportunities, you do have that small green space near Village Hall, down where there's that small little fountain area. Other communities have incorporated small fountain areas that are interactive in a way, a variety of different things, but if in the future that was something that the village wanted to think about to provide a little bit more activity and engagement, of course, that's an opportunity as well. Additionally, fireplaces, these are some things that other communities are starting to incorporate to bring life and seasonality to the streets. The one on the left, this is from Wheaton. This is a very modern version of that. Of course, a lot has to be coordinated with regard to how they function, how they protect the public from getting to them. They typically run on gas, and they typically, are, closed up so that nobody can actually put their fingers into the fire. They're very safe, but they still provide that feeling of warmth. Mid-block crossing. So Scranton Alley is such an important place. We thought there was an opportunity to span a mid-block crossing between Scranton Alley across Scranton Avenue. And so some examples of other mid-block crossings. This bottom one here is in Glencoe, near Writers Theater at Tudor Court. It's a decorative crossing. It's got LED lighting incorporated into it. Another example of a mid-block crossing on a decorative streetscape is here in the middle, and this one at the top is from Maple Avenue in downtown Evanston. A variety of different ways, but again, just to kind of promote pedestrian activity across the street there. Plantings, we know that there's been some issues with having the lawn survive on Center Avenue. There are some opportunities to incorporate native plantings, things that stay relatively low, but are able to soak up the water and provide a more permanent, kind of massing of plant material. So we thought, plantings that are relatively low, something like this could replace the lawn, demonstrate the village's commitment to sustainable practices as well. Sign kiosks, I understand that this was a topic of discussion earlier. We just wanted to raise it here in case it was something that folks wanted to think about again, but this sign kiosk in Glencoe was recently installed. It's a very simple cabinet that allows the village to put up posters, let people know where parking is, where the shops are, and of course they come in all shapes and sizes. Lighting at Village Green. So we talked about lighting along Scranton Avenue. There is electrical at the gazebo, and so at Village Green, if there was a desire to look at other opportunities to enhance Village Green with very subtle, sort of respectful type lighting, these are some examples here. We thought this one was kind of interesting. Otherwise, uplighting or downlighting the trees so that you're not looking at the light fixture, but you're just seeing the good elements of the park. A couple things about furnishings and amenities. So, on Block 1, you already have a lot of streetscape furnishings and amenities that we'll want to tie into just so that it makes it a unified streetscape. Things like your trash bins and recycling bins, those should probably stay the same. Your light poles, of course, would stay the same. Tree grates, do you have tree grates on Block 1 where there are small trees? In the section of Scranton Avenue that we've been looking at, we're looking at whether we can protect all of those trees. Of course, they're too large. They don't have tree grates. And so we would, think to, just have an open tree pit in that case. But otherwise, things like the bluestone unit pavers, the little raised stone curbs in the background here, we would recommend not repeating that. We would recommend making this a very clean, very safe, simple concrete, broom finished concrete sidewalk with a nice, interesting joint pattern, and then put our pennies into some of the more decorative things like vertical things like festoon lights and plantings and that sort of thing. In the spirit of less is more, I thought it would be worthwhile to share some imagery from the streetscapes that have been installed in Winnetka recently. These are on Chestnut on the west side of the Elm Street Business District. Winnetka didn't want to have anything too fancy. They just wanted to clean it up and really make it more of a pedestrian-friendly environment. In Winnetka, we did take a couple of parking spaces away and expanded the corner bump outs to provide for larger seating areas. There was a lot of consternation about that when we talked about it during design, but in the end, it's become a really wonderful amenity for the restaurants. And also, we did all of that work prior to COVID being a thing, and so now that everybody is sort of forced outside, it has had that added benefit as well. Okay, so moving on from the imagery to some line drawings and plans. This is a drawing that shows the existing conditions on Scranton Avenue. We've, documented the number of parking spaces and the trees and cafe tables that are 2 tops or 4 tops, and there's a little handy chart down here at the bottom right that compares the existing conditions to Concept 1 and Concept 2. I will point out, here is this intersection here at Center in Scranton near Innovasi, and you can see the size and the scale of 4 tops compared to this very large green area. So I think I heard it earlier that if this were opened up to be more of a pedestrian-friendly place, we could provide a lot more seating and dining for folks right here at this 100% corner. So I'm going to go through Concept 1 first, and then we'll go to Concept 2. So in Concept 1, this looks at retaining the existing traffic system that you have today. That would be the diagonal spaces on the south side and the parallel spaces on the north side. So you got your 2-way system exactly as it works today. The improvements that we have shown as opportunities, sort of starting down here at Center, would be taking some of those lawn areas and replanting them with native grasses, very low native grass material. Also taking the shape of those sidewalks from square and right angle to rounded spaces. That provides a little bit more seating space, a little bit more space for people to walk and flow through. And then as you get to this corner, we've shown replacing the large green garden area with green spaces that are sort of hugging a center seating space. So in the center, this would be very flat concrete with a nice joint pattern. And then we've got planting beds around the perimeter. In those planting beds, we would have festoon lighting. And so those decorative festoon poles would be spaced around with a canopy overhead that would be that low pedestrian-friendly type of a canopy. We also have an opportunity to incorporate casual seating. These could be in the form of low retaining walls or low seat walls and benches. Those would be these brown double-lined items here. And then we've got lots of space for movable seating. Of course, this can take on lots of different forms, but we've just mocked them up just to kind of see the differences. So, for instance, in the existing where we had 24 tops, in Concept 1, we get 34 tops. So we've really expanded the amount of seating. Moving to the east. So, again, opportunities for more seating. We've hung on to the existing trees that are there, but we've found opportunities to add new trees. So for instance, this would be a new tree. These light green ones would be new trees. Opportunities to incorporate festoon lighting that connects from a new pole to the building would be these upside down V shapes here. The festoon poles would also be the places where we would recommend mounting the banners. So we would be able to clean up those light poles and let them just be plain by themselves, and then the festoon poles would have an integrated banner arm system, so you would no longer need to use those clamps. At Hub and Cycle, there's some temporary bike rack parking there, so we suggested replacing those with some U-shaped racks that would get bolted to the concrete. And then here is our mid-block crossing. So here's Scranton Alley, and we had an opportunity here for more festoon lighting overhead, some small casual seating at these bump outs here, and then you would make your way across the street to a wide sidewalk and another landing. That really reduces the length of the crosswalk for people to cross. And then working our way east again, spots for cafe tables and trash and recycling while leaving a very wide concrete sidewalk between the building face and that utility zone where the trees and the light poles and the festoon lights would go. Here at Bluffington's, we've, just for comparison purposes, we've kept the existing bump out generally the same as it is today. We can, fit in a couple of small planters and a bench on each side, some festoon lighting around here. But I wanted to just show that to compare to this big one. If we were to take, say, a parking space or two, we could get substantially more cafe tables in that space. So it's just something to keep in mind as we're thinking about it. On the north side of the street, this is the sunny side of the street. This doesn't have quite the same activity that the south side of the street has, but we're still offering up some similar types of improvements. The corners could be planted and have place for bike racks. There are existing planters against the buildings here. Those would remain, the light poles would remain, the street trees would remain, but we would be formalizing some of these transition areas between the alley and the street with bump outs that could have planter pots on them to help, bring more edge and definition to the street. And then, of course, we talked about the mid-block bump out. These are enlargements that show the same thing. I don't think we need to repeat those things. This is a section drawing / photograph that shows what these things could look like near the Innovasi corner. So this is on the west side looking east. And you can see we've got about 80 feet right of way to work with. So we've got our 20-foot roadway here, and we've got the diagonal spaces going eastbound, and we've got the parallel spaces going westbound. One thing to keep in mind when I show you concept 2 is visually, a road situation like this does give more importance or priority to the pedestrian because you're not seeing the sides of cars on both sides. You're only seeing the thin part of the car on one side and then the diagonal space, you're seeing part of the sides there. So that's just one thing to keep in mind when we get to the next one. This shows that seating arrangement with the festoon poles and the banners and this sort of clean concrete area. These are seat walls. These could look like anything. They don't necessarily have to look like brick, but just something to give you a sense of scale. And then on the opposite side of the street, we've got our light poles that are clean, nothing attached to them, and bike racks as well. Sometimes we get questions or, we talk about, why does this space feel like such a nice, comfortable outdoor room? And in Lake Bluff, you're at a 4-to-1 aspect ratio, which means, for every, 1 in the vertical, you've got 4 in the horizontal. Sort of urban design best practices will say anywhere between 4-in-1 or 3-in-1 really has that shape of a comfortable outdoor room. And so, it's just a way to say, don't change it. What you have is working. We just want to make subtle changes to the streetscape to clean that up and make it more livable. Okay, I'm going to go to concept number 2. So concept number 2, the tallies are here on the bottom right. And unlike concept one and what's existing out there today, this one looks at this one-way system. So we're going one way down Scranton Avenue eastbound with diagonal spaces on each side. And I do want to point out, so if you look at the parking table, existing today, we have 35 spaces. Concept one, because we took out a couple of spaces for this mid-block crossing, we have 32 spaces. Concept two, again, you know, we've taken out some for the mid-block crossing. We've increased parking to do this one way. That gets us to 40 spaces. If you compare it to existing, it really only is an increase of 5 spaces when we factor in things like the mid-block crossing. So it's just, you know, streetscapes are sort of always about a value system and choosing, you know, how you want to divvy up your spaces. But the 5 spaces additional is something to kind of keep in mind. This is very similar to the program for concept one, just with slightly different shapes and sizes. You know, this shows those modular planters, the rounded ones with the bench on it. But again, we still have our space for low festoon poles at Innovasi, more space for outdoor seating and dining. And then we've identified a couple of places where we can have the taller festoons go across the road. We think that because of the existing trees and the existing light poles, it doesn't make sense. We really have a hard time making light poles go across the road the whole length. But we could pick a couple of key areas, such as, you know, the west end, the east end, and then also this mid-block crossing. Could be places for those taller festoon poles if the group wanted to do that. Again, this is a blow up of those areas. And so this is what that would look like if we were looking at the section. And my smart designer even mocked up the diagonal spaces and what that would look like. So when we were looking at concept one and we were looking at diagonal eastbound and parallel westbound, you have a different view of the street, whereas this one would have much more car in your view here on the north side of the street. So something to keep in mind. But again, this shows the festoons overhead the street, and then they would transition to these lower ones down over the patio area at Innovasi. Same as before, the banners would be attached to the festoon poles as well. And they could be on both sides of the pole. They don't even have to be just on one, but there's lots of opportunity there. And then the same thing with the aspect ratio. I hope I haven't taken too much time. So I appreciate you guys all bearing with me as I get through this all. Just a couple of comments about our scope. TESCA's scope is to produce, the final deliverable would be a preferred concept plan. And so our working with you tonight would be to kind of go through this workshop to get your input and get your thoughts, answer any questions you might have. One thing that I would suggest maybe is a way to kind of, you know, have a part of our discussion is that there's kind of 4 main key things that we would love to get input on as we move forward into preparing a draft final plan. That would be, one would be the parking scenario. Do we want to go with the one-way versus the two-way? The other thing, set number 2, would be the festoon lighting, you know, over the road versus, you know, down low where sidewalks are. The third item would be the Innovasi corner. Do we want to repeat the same kind of treatments for Bluffington so they get more outdoor seating? And then the fourth and the last item, if I could be so bold, would be the mid-block crosswalks. Do we like that as an idea? And with that, I'll turn it over to you all.
Okay, thanks, Jody.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting we go back and look at concept 1 first.
Sure.
And I have a whole bunch of things that I've scribbled on my drawing, but I'm going to give somebody else a chance to go first. So who wants to go? You got 5 seconds.
And let me just mention, if anyone from the public wants to speak, just press the raise your hand button down in the lower center, and I'll give you permission to speak. Anyone from the public? Thanks.
Okay, but let's not hear about the two-way versus one-way street just yet till we get there.
Hey, Bob, can I go first?
Yeah, go right ahead.
All right, awesome, thanks. I just a great presentation and beautiful, and thank you for putting it together and exploring it in so many different ways. I think a couple of the things that I really like, I really love the seating that's on the Innovasi corner and having the opportunity for the benches when the seats, movable seats aren't there just for the restaurant, especially during the winter months and that sort of thing. I'm not going to talk about concept 2, but on concept 2, you have the different planters, which allows a little bit of maybe flexibility to walk around the outside, and having that option if it's really crowded for seating might be something to consider, just that sort of thing. I'll go back to your list. With the festoons, I think low festoons, if they're there, are better, but I'm not necessarily a big fan of festoons, so I'm going to kind of just hold the middle ground. With the Innovasi corner, as far as repeating it over at the Bluffington's corner, I think that would be a great idea, but I'd also like to see it. I realize there's not actual dining and there's no restaurants on the post office corner, but it's only like 19 short steps away from Innovasi, and it seems like there's an opportunity for, especially if we're going to push out the sidewalk to, have the shorter crosswalks, if that's an option, to put on some seating in the sunny side on that nice corner over there, especially because that's in your 100% corner, the way you've identified it. Back to the crosswalks, I think having the bump out to make the crosswalk shorter I love that idea, and if it's not too expensive, I think it's a great way to make it safer, slow people down, break apart the parking areas and that sort of thing. But also this north side of the street with the sun on it is so underappreciated, and I feel like especially if you're putting in that short crosswalk, there could be an opportunity to, if you had some additional seating that was built in for people just to want to sit there, especially now it's even closer and more accessible because it's a short crosswalk. So I'd love to see some more seating on the north side of the street. My last thing that I wanted to just touch on was when it comes to the festoons and adding these to the south side of the street, it's going to make the south side of the street even that much more wonderful and beautiful and inviting. However, it leaves the north side of the street just sitting there not doing anything. And so I guess my question would be, have you seen success with bringing this sort of lighting or doing a combination where there's something else you could do or something that's complementary to that sort of lighting, but where you don't have the storefronts that have that historical look to them, or they're just more plain, to make it so people want to go to that side of the street, even though there's no restaurants there. So those are my comments and questions.
Thank you. Those are great. I've written them down and I appreciate them. I can certainly respond, or how would you like to run this, Chair Hunter?
Let's maybe we can stack these up and you can respond to them at the end.
Sure.
Because it's probably going to be some of the same with anybody else.
I'll go ahead if that's okay. Love the idea of concept 1. I think it addresses the concerns without losing what we all love about the village. So congratulations. And I think I just want to back up Julie's compliments to your presentation and your thoughtfulness. And I'm all for the festoons. I do think too much is sometimes you lose it if it's everywhere. But I think if you handle it the way you've had, kind of sparingly, I think that's wonderful. We were talking about the idea of like doing them over Scranton, which I think is wrong because it's not that kind of street. It's not a full celebration. The other side of the street, unfortunately, isn't the life of the party, and you don't want to highlight that. You just, at night, having that activity on that one side, I think, is very fair. And having it at the certain crosswalks, I think, is very smart. And I think when you're in there, you kind of see that depth of the street with the lights crossing. I think that'll be a lovely effect to have in the village. I also like the idea, even though it's not shown here, of bringing that lighting into the park so that maybe we can extend the life of the park beyond dusk. If we had lights stringing from the gazebo out and almost towards the sidewalks, I think that could have a whole new life for the village that it doesn't have now. Kind of that middle image, I think is wonderful.
This one.
Yeah, I think that
like that.
A whole new kind of dimension to the village. We have little beautiful, huge, I'm sure you've been here in the holiday time with the Christmassy, the overscale Christmas lights. It's my favorite. I almost want to drive everybody I know through our downtown. It's the most beautiful time of the year in our village with those lights on at night. So if we could bring something like that in during the summertime, it would just be a lovely idea.
Sure.
And I won't talk about 2 yet either, but I do feel that Concept 1 hits the areas that we want to hit. And bringing any kind of additional seating, I do think that the one downside to extending the seating at Bluffington's, they close at 3. So it's not really the draw that Innovasi has. And Innovasi has kind of that corner, the primary corner location, and I think it's good to have that scale of seating there. Maybe something a little bit, instead of at the corner, bring that extra seating in the middle where we have other activities, may be more beneficial. Then no one's going to be sitting down at Bluffington's at 8 at night. There's nothing being served there. So maybe if we brought it more towards the middle, we could get usage out of that kind of spillover space.
That's a good point. I had no idea that they closed at 3, so I appreciate that.
They have a very nice business model. For themselves,
That's great.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who else?
Regarding the, Matt, what you just talked about with Bluffington's, the uses of these buildings can change over time. None of these restaurants have been here for really that long. If I look back, the corner of where Bluffington's is now used to be a men's clothing store. So these things can change. And there already are plans right next door to Bluffington's to build another restaurant in the back, and I don't think that one's going to be closing at 3 o'clock. So I don't know. Regarding the festoon lighting, I love the idea that we would do something different with the banners, because they really look, like it's a gerrymandered thing that they were just stuck on. I'm not so sure my feeling about the festoon lighting though. It seems like something that's great for to emphasize a temporary thing like some kind of a function or an event or something like that. I'm not so sure that I like it all year round, particularly when you get to February or something like that, where nobody's going to walk. Very few people are going to be walking down the street. Then about Innovasi Corner, I love what you're doing with that one. I've thought that needs something like this for a long time, so congratulations there. And I'd like to see the Bluffington's Corner built up. One issue with the current thing on Bluffington's that you're solving almost is the first time I ever drove down that street at night, maybe 10 o'clock at night when downtown Lake Bluff is rolled up and put away. I remember turning the corner and driving east, and I didn't realize that bump out was there, and I almost ran right over it. And I think by having the current bump out at Innovasi and having another one by Scranton Alley, will kind of it adds some consistency. I like that.
Okay, Neil?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. I got some sort of detailed kind of things. Basically, I agree with almost everything that everybody has said, though, Jody. You did a great job here. And, we did have some further some conversation a while back, and I think you picked up on just about everything. But I have a couple of questions. One is not really a question, it's an observation. Where you have the angled, where you have the bump outs, and there's two of these angled ones that are on the south side that angle back in with the direction of the parking. And if you look at the one that's presently at Bluffington's, the snowplows tend to hit it, so it's all beat up. So I would not do the angles. I think, in either the middle or at the end, I would straighten those things out. And at the one down at Bluffington's, I'd straighten it out, and we could straighten it out and lose the one parking space and make that space even bigger, that would be pretty good. Yeah, so I'm saying omit the points, and I'm guessing that you have eliminated any other paving material anywhere in this, and it's just concrete.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. The intent was not to omit it completely. I think we could talk about it, but I will say that what's out there today, it appears that there is this brick paving ribbon. It appears that ribbon is installed on a flexible base, like a gravel base, and then there's the concrete here, and you can see the brick ribbon, of course, is settling. It's shifting around. It's not very level. We're completely open to keeping the brick ribbon, but my suggestion would be when it gets installed, install it on a concrete base. So basically you're building the sidewalk, creating a notch, and then you're installing it in concrete. That's a typical detail that we do so that it stays flush and level forever.
But, you know, the idea of the way that you have the festoon lighting on the diagonals against the building gives me an idea that, not that you quite echo it on the ground, but instead of just, you know, normal expansion joints, that pattern starts to become more of a crosshatch or something like that. It really starts to give a pattern that doesn't require new materials. New materials, as we found out with the slate, the bluestone, don't necessarily work, and obviously the brick didn't work. It worked for quite a few years, but let's see. What's my other notes here?
Maybe I could respond while you're talking about concrete. If anybody gets into Wilmette's downtown, which is currently under construction, we have an all-concrete sidewalk, but we've done a very specific jointing pattern, which gives it a really nice finish. It's very simple things like a 6-inch joint ribbon around the tree pits, and it's a very deliberate joint pattern that, you know, connects to those tree pits and back to the buildings. And I think it would be something different for Lake Bluff, but I do believe in, you know, well-finished and well-jointed broom-finished concrete can really be beautiful. And then, of course, the durability is key.
Right. As long as they don't do any roofing over it. And the other thing with the I'll call it the Innovasi corner, what is in there, which we've kind of tended to ignore, is what's called the dancers.
Yes.
Which was a sculpture that was given to the village by the Lake Bluff Garden Club, I don't know, probably 25 years ago. And it was kind of put in there, and I never really liked it there. But we need to find a place somewhere, or whether it's along in one of these planting islands or something, I don't know. But we need to find some place within the village that was done by Margot McMahon. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm liking this, and as far as the crosswalk at Scranton Alley is brick, right?
Scranton Alley itself is brick, and so we would not propose any changes to Scranton Alley. It's really just here for reference. Yeah,
I just wonder if it wouldn't be just the only place that you do it is run that brick across to the crosswalk, and then pick it up on the other side. Well, just pick it up until you get to the curb line.
That's interesting. You know, I wonder if we did that there, if we might want to repeat that theme at Innovasi Corner and
that was going to be my next comment. Yeah, you might want to do that.
I think that's a nice idea. And again, that would be on a concrete base, so we'd make sure that it's very durable.
That's the place it shows up.
Yeah.
And then it would work nicely with the brick kind of benches instead of, you know, metals. Otherwise, I'm really liking this, and I didn't think I'd like the festoon lighting, but again, the less is more comment happened to be mine.
Well, I think that's a lot of times. I think with streetscapes, it's easy to want to incorporate everything, but when you do that, it becomes so cluttered that it doesn't become a place anymore.
It's not Disneyland, and you know that's what we don't want to. We want to go there. Just as long as I'm talking, I'm going to tell you about the street lights that are there, which were not the original street lights. I thought they were. But anyway, when we redid that whole street, and we replaced a lot of those street lights, or replaced, because they were all gas at one point. And the idea was that, well, we should make them taller. We made them 16 feet with the arrangement that they have so that nobody would be able to put banners on them.
That's funny.
And if you haven't hit your head, you're shorter than I am. I've hit my head on those things more times than I can count. Anyway, that's the history of the street light with the banners.
Good to know.
So I don't know. Does anybody else have any other comments?
I had a quick comment. This is Eric Bailey. I'm the director of the public library.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Should turn on my video here as well. Great to be here this evening. Jody, this looks fantastic. So I'll toss in my kudos along with everyone else's.
Oh, thank you.
So my questions are twofold. First, that big rock outside the Wilmette Public Library, where would I get one?
So there's a few of them at Wilmette Library, and you should go check them out. They're pretty amazing, but they come from California.
Oh, okay.
And it's a lightweight concrete product. It's, so you're looking at the shell and it gets anchored in. It's a relatively easy installation. These pebbles were 3D printed from actual pebbles that were found on the coast. So it's kind of a cool thing. But anyways, I'm happy to talk with you offline and provide you a contact over there.
Sounds good.
Eric,
They look very interesting.
If you really would like a big rock, there's a big rock that's out at the public safety building before you get all the way in there. And that rock used to stand across the village hall when the old fire department was there. So that rock was there forever until the new building was built, which was in the 80s. So that's a rock that's got some history in Lake Bluff.
Cool.
Because I've been over there fair number of times, and I've never noticed that rock. So I'll have to look for it the next time out.
Right. It's pretty big.
Okay. All right. And that was kind of a facetious question, but a little bit more seriously, from the perspective of the library, I would be interested in how you feel. How will you feel the concepts would tie in with the landscaping on Block 3, and in particular in front of the library, how well it would or would not tie in. And on the not side of things, I'd be interested in if you have any thoughts as far as, things that might be done with the library's landscaping that would tie it in better if Concept 1 or Concept 2 were adopted.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question, and I'm so glad you asked. Just because we're looking at Scranton Avenue doesn't mean it's limited to Scranton. I think just like, it's applicable to Block 1 could certainly be applicable to the library. I think once there's an established theme instead of furnishings, instead of elements, then it's a matter of sort of picking the ones that work the best for you. I think streetscapes are really most successful because of what's happening on the other side of the storefront or on the other side of the building. For the Lake Bluff Library, I can imagine you probably have, some folks that come out there to read, or maybe you have small events or programs that happen out there. And so they should be designed to accommodate those things so that it works when you have a small event and also when it's just a casual reader. So I would be thrilled to look at those areas and talk with you more about that. But it looks like you already have some really nice spaces, and I remember it because I've been there a few times. It's a lovely building and a lovely site. So easily some things could be transferable here as well.
Well, we put some real time into getting things sorted out there. I think, it's 7 or 8 years now. I think now, Neil. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we have a lovely reading garden there, as well as some nice landscaping all around the building, and it had gotten, unfortunately, a bit out of hand, grown over, and we put a lot of TLC into it in recent years, and it's I think very lovely now. But at the same time, you can't lose sight, I think, that landscaping is, you're working with a lot of organic things, and that you need to allow room for growth and change there as well. Nothing is completely static. So definitely would be interested in chatting with you further if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have at least three people here who I've promoted to panelists who would like to speak on this item.
Oh, okay.
Rob, do you want to start off?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. My name is Rob Douglas. I'm the managing member of the ownership of the two buildings on Block 1, and I'm also an architect. So I am somewhat intrigued by everything that's being discussed here with the section of Scranton Avenue for Blocks 2 and 4. But honestly, I have to step back, and I want everyone to think about master planning here for the whole central business district, not just one segment of it. It needs to be an all-inclusive approach to these improvements. Now, I recognize the opportunities to change the curbs along Scranton between blocks 2 and 4. That sort of structural component is critical for that area. But when it comes to all the other extras with lighting and all of the streetscape furniture, this needs to be a uniform, all-inclusive approach to the whole downtown. And that really, I think one thing Block 1 did when it was built 12 years ago is it really framed the Village Green and brought the Village Green into the central business district. Also, with the renovation of the Village Market building, Walnut was no longer an alley. It became a street. These are integral elements in the central business district. So to look at the corner of Center, Scranton, and Walnut as the visitor entry is really not correct. It really should be farther west, really at the train station. That is the terminus of Scranton Avenue, and that is the primary entry point as people come into town, and of course they're coming up through Center Avenue, which is bringing you off of 176. But I really would like to see more master planning and inclusive thinking. This to me worries me a little bit because I don't want the village to fall into the trappings of patchwork quilt type of design. Let's make this so that it is a common thread that weaves the whole central business district together. So that is really my standpoint. I like what's being talked about, but I want the whole central business district to be included in this, not to be left off to the side as another tier of whatever one might be defining the central business district layering to be. We need to have a unified master plan here. So that's really my feeling here. I like the idea of the light elements, but once again, I would hate to see it just on one block and not on the whole central business district. That lighting would work well across potentially the Block 1, tying in the Village Green, depending on what kind of lighting might be considered out there. So there's a lot of great opportunities, but let's not look at just Block 2 and 4 as the framing of the streetscapes. So those are my thoughts.
I can jump in here just to say we couldn't agree more, and you're absolutely right. Block 1 is such a lovely gem in the downtown, and by saying visitor entry, not to negate the entrance from the west at the metro station, but just how you view Scranton Avenue, and really to make the case for what the different parking situation would look like. But absolutely, we've been focused on Scranton Avenue only because we know that the roadway has to be reconstructed, but we would think that whatever is chosen should certainly be chosen with the mind in what Block 1 looks like, what the future of Block 3 looks like as well. So I appreciate those comments so much.
Well, at this juncture, this document doesn't really reference those areas, and I just don't want to have that fall through the cracks. And
Sure, understand.
And then
Rob, if I can just say something, I think you'll remember this back when we were doing all of that Scranton Avenue master planning everywhere, and your block one was to be sort of the prototype of everything else that was going to happen. So that, in a sense, was the master plan. The knuckles were put in. A lot of that work was done, but money ran out of the project. And but the bluestone and all of these stuff that was the sidewalk was supposed to be the templates for everything else. Well, we've discovered, and if you're, that was not a good template. So I agree with you. This can't be the end of things. And I don't know what's going to happen once the tent goes away. Then that's going to open up a whole new ball game of opportunity. But you're right.
Just take one step back and just make sure we are including all elements within the central business district, not just simply one segment of it.
Yeah,
So,
you got one of the most active elements there, so.
Jody, can I share really quickly?
Of course. Oh, let me, do I need to stop? Yes.
This is to Rob's point. This was the previously approved central business district concept plan for the streetscape. And even it stopped short, to Rob's point, it stopped short west of the train station. It should have been inclusive of that and moved another block over to the east, right? The idea that this is, the next plan that the ABR will be working on will be more inclusive than this plan, but this plan is certainly more inclusive. It's only, focusing on this narrow block again because of the opportunity presenting itself with this imminent construction, right? But certainly, Rob, your point rings true. And I think when staff was having conversations with Jody when she was working up this plan, we talked about that, how all these elements, these amenities that the ABR is reviewing tonight can be plug and play and could easily work along the facade. That lighting, like they're talking about on the south side, could easily be done on the north side. Right, Jody?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if I could just jump in for a second, I'm Mike Dornicker with Lake Bluff Brewing, owner of Lake Bluff Brewing on Block 1. So just to that point, the only thing I would mention would be to Julie's point, that if this work in Block 2 and 4, which is much needed, gets done, let's say fall, that the concern for us in Block 1 would be, to Julie's point, that versus the north side of the street versus the south side of the street, would be more inviting and more beautiful. So depending on timing of when you guys were thinking of including Block 1, as long as it's not a full summer of if a new customer comes in town and they see this beautiful landscape and this beautiful lighting, and they got to choose whether to go, Block 1's way or Block 2 and 4's way, as long as we don't lose a whole season of that, I think, that makes a lot of sense. But just to point out there that, we're all still kind of hurting from COVID, so it just wouldn't quite be, in my opinion, right to make such drastic changes to one side of town versus the other right away. And that would be my only point.
It's an excellent point. Thank you.
Was there anybody else that?
Yeah, I think Susie McMurray would like to speak.
Hi,
also.
this is Susie McMurray.
Yeah.
And I'd like to address a couple things for Prairie Espresso, who seems to be killing it tonight in the alley, and so he's not online. But in the first layout where she has all the tables, she only shows tables in the alley. Prairie Espresso has tables on the sidewalk in front of the alley, and he now has a new area which is going to be in the old bike shop, where he will also have tables on the sidewalk, but they are not shown.
That's
So
wonderful. Yeah, I can address that. And
Yeah.
you know, whenever we design streetscapes, we're
Sure.
not, or I should say, the village would not be purchasing tables and chairs. We're just leaving space
Right.
for the business
they-
owners to do that. And so,
Yeah.
for sure, we recognize that. We're not
Okay.
suggesting that they would not have those
Okay.
spaces, but absolutely, that is a gem in downtown.
Well, and they are
So,
also open at night.
yeah.
So I said, "Are you online and watching?" And he said, "No, I'm killing it in the alley."
Good for him. Well, it's a
So
beautiful
that's
evening.
okay.
No, absolutely. We'd want to support all of his outdoor seating, and the same goes for other businesses. I mean, it doesn't have to be a food and beverage establishment to put out chairs. If the Floatstone therapy place wants to put chairs
That's
out,
me.
I think that would be
That's
wonderful.
me.
I think all of these places should have space to do that, because that makes it more of a livable, walkable street.
I had an idea for. I'm so glad that I can't think of his name, but was there for the library though.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would be so cool if the library was able to expand, or the history museum, over to the PNC building and have an overhead walk that connected the two buildings, and make the PNC an activity center for the town, where kids could go after school. They could plant gardens. They could learn how to bank. They could learn how to grow vegetables. They could, it would just be like a community center that was hands-on for anybody who wanted to work there. And I just thought it would give us a purpose for that eyesore.
The one comment I would have, and of course we can't speak for what's going to happen to the PNC Bank, but I would say that your downtown is so walkable and so quaint that we should really encourage people to be walking across the street rather than in overhead bridges. So I think the more bodies on the street, the more eyes on the street, really helps bring life.
But I would love to see that the library could somehow utilize that building and make it accessible for everyone in town. I think it would be so cool.
It would be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may?
Sure.
I agree. The chief obstacle that we've run into, and we've absolutely taken a look at that and priced it out. But if we were going to, for the library side, if we were going to acquire that property and then work it up as expanding a new library building over there, and then the museum perhaps would occupy the former library building. The current space and layout of the bank building wouldn't work well for a library and would be smaller than what we currently have. So there would be construction that would be needed on top of purchasing the property. And in running through the numbers, where our engineers who we were working with in terms of pricing out our options, it got to be pretty expensive as far as going over there. I think it would be fantastic. I love the idea of a community center. Perhaps in addition to, I think that the existing building would probably work better for as a community center than it would necessarily work as a library or museum just straight away. No, there really are so many great possibilities with that Block 3 building, and I don't know, just anxious to see what happens with it. But thank you for thinking of us.
Okay. Where are we now? Mike?
I don't think we have anyone else in the audience who is looking to speak right now.
Okay, well, we should move on to concept 2, just to give it the...
Sure. May I respond to a couple of the things that I think we didn't get to address for the comments for concept 1? And they're just 2 things. I think Julie asked a really good question about, infrastructure and how that relates to, potentially new land uses. I think Matt might have asked the same, but we have seen that when welcoming streetscapes are built in the public right-of-way, oftentimes it does lead to new land uses, new businesses taking part, because now they've got a nice, better open space in front of their business. And so that really is something that can be done and should be considered. And we love the idea of incorporating more places for outdoor seating on the north side, and for even if Innovasi or others wanted to expand their dining to the north side, assuming it's done safely, I think that's a wonderful idea. And then one other item I heard about was sort of this seasonality of the streetscape, and will somebody walk down the street in the cold months of February, for instance? And we've seen a lot of really wonderful things happening in wintertime. Minnesota, the other European countries do great things in the winter with their outdoor streets, and I think we've all started to see that, especially this past year with COVID. But things like additional lighting, especially when it gets dark so early. Also things like fireplaces, those are things that can be done to help bring warmth and encourage people to come out. So we can certainly think about this as being a year-round type of an environment.
Okay. What's next? Concept 2?
Sure. I mean, I've heard a lot of great comments so far. I mean, I would say it sounds like so far there were a lot of comments that were advocating for concept 1 over concept 2, but we're happy to we're happy to continue to talk about it however you all want to.
Well, I know we've gotten some letters and comments saying we hope we don't do that. I personally have been up and down the street when everybody has got their 19-foot pickup there, and I see nothing but an issue of collision with bikes, with pedestrians. Anyway, that's my own opinion. But I like your concept, your idea about what you look at when you're going down the street. You look at the sides of all these things. Anyway, so let's have somebody talk about what they think about the concept 2, the one-way street.
Yeah. I can start off again. Oh, sorry. You want to go ahead, Neil?
Well, my comment was I like concept 1.
There you go.
Duly noted.
Julie?
My comment is I just don't feel as though having a one-way street, there's so many challenges that come along with that it does not seem to be a good choice with all the other great opportunities with keeping our two-way street. I'll leave it at that.
Matt, I know where you are, but you might as well say it.
Yeah, I think this hits almost every wrong thing that we could do, which is great to see. Just because you have to get it out there, but it just seems like it goes against the way that the village flows. There's a daily rhythm to the village depending on the season, and it just totally goes against everything that Lake Bluff does. And I know you're not trying to force anything on us, but it would be the total wrong thing to do for 20 reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, even your that great Photoshop perspective is a great, that was my fear, is you're looking like you're going through like a Target parking lot and not a streetscape, so which is the last thing we want to do downtown. It truly looks like you're going through a parking lot, and it's such a gem of a place. It's just, there's so many, and it's expressed by other people in the village. I think it's the one thing I think the village would all agree on, that this is the wrong way. So you've united us.
I just remember last time we talked about this, Mickey Collins was piped up, and she lives just due east of there, a couple of blocks. And her comment is stuck with me, is I'm coming up to town, and I get to the corner, and it says, "Do not enter."
Yeah.
That's not a friendly thing.
And then it forces you down a really bad road, that the road over the library.
You say nothing about the traffic problems it creates, how to get to. Anyway.
Yeah. But
well,
I
you
do
think about, who the streetscape is for. I mean, it's for visitors, but it's for your community, and you have so much community coming from the east.
Nice, but it's not for the visitors, it's for the community. And I also made the comment, nobody goes through here. They're here, going
It's a
here
great
to
comment.
do someplace else. And that's always been the way Lake Bluff is, so.
Bob, it's
If
Susie,
I
and
recall,
I'm
I think it
sorry
was
to say-
I think it was Jeff Hansen that came up with the idea, and I just would compliment him for, being thoughtful and coming up with ideas. We may not like it, but it's good to have ideas.
Still a good guy. Yeah.
How many parking
Absolutely.
spaces?
The difference between civil engineers and architects and planners, right?
Drew, how many parking spaces does it create?
Jody, you want to go through that?
Because downtown Lake Bluff needs parking.
So I'm trying to remember, Susie, were you at the last meeting of the ABR? We talked about the various parking solutions. All of them had warts, right? None of them were perfect.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, and the concept one is, it in terms of the grand ledger of public parking inventory, it does go the wrong way. However, we're still in a parking, we're still in a positive position, even if you take away the 3 stalls to accomplish the mid-street crossing, the mid-block crossing. The biggest issue is, in terms of Lake Bluff parking, is that there's plenty of parking, it's just not where people want it. It's not the most convenient, right?
Well, because nobody wants to go from the train station.
Right, which is even more abundant now more than ever, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you don't have to spend a dime, there's plenty of available public parking.
Okay, I have another question. So
Sure.
Would block 1 be included in the one-way? Or if it can be two-way, can you still have it two-way and have angled parking on both sides?
So block 1 could remain exactly like it is today, two-way. At least that conceptually, that's how it was thought of, that only this leg between Walnut and Oak would be one-way bound.
Yeah.
That's the way it was conceived.
Well, and if memory serves me right, if you had the diagonal parking on both sides, the street centers do not align.
They don't, but they kind of really don't today. And to answer your question, Susie, I think we're picking up 9 stalls by doing one-way.
That would be
there's
9 more customers for me.
But that's the trade-off, right?
Yeah.
You're serving multiple constituencies here with shoppers as well as the pedestrian folks and cyclists. You're trying to accommodate all users.
Right. Well, I agree with Rob, though, that we need to do an overall plan and include the whole, central business district. So I'm all for that.
Maybe if I could just chime in on a couple of things, because this ultimately is always the conversation to have is, how do you address on-street parking? A couple of things come to mind. One is from an economic development perspective, and we hang around with economic development folks enough that I hear it all the time. Two-way roadways provides more eyeballs to your store. So oftentimes the economic development experts will make the case for retaining two-way traffic for that reason. Another couple of things, we know that there's a lot of parking down at the station area. It's not a very attractive walk, and so the more things we can do to the streetscape for these blocks, including Block 1, would really draw folks into the downtown from the metro station. If you were to take, I haven't done this, but if you were to take Old Orchard Mall, for instance, and compare how far you walk from the parking lot to get to any store, I'll bet you walk further than you would between the downtown and the metro station. And so I think what we're recommending here is by having a more interesting walk, it will draw people in more readily. And the last point to make is that, we want to make sure that we're designing the streetscape not just for cars, but also for bikers and walkers. We know that Prairie Espresso is doing this awesome business as well as the other businesses in town. I've heard that, from the bike community, there's a lot of bikers that come here just to get a cup of coffee or just to use the downtown. So we want to make sure that it stays just as desirable for bikers and walkers as it does for cars. And that's the balance, of course. It's a lot to fit into a small, compact downtown.
Yeah, to that point, Jody, this Saturday the weather was, unpleasantly pleasant, or I'm sorry, unusually pleasant for this time of year. Mid-afternoon on the Saturday, I can't tell you how many bicycles were parked in front of the brewery and strewn about the village green. I don't know. I think Mike had a really good Saturday at the brewery, just guessing by the number of cyclists that were there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, thumbs up for Mike. Yes.
Jody, I wonder if you've ever been here when Farmers Market is operating?
Oh, yes. I love your farmers market.
Okay.
I live in Ravinia, by the way, so I'm a neighbor. I come there all the time.
Good. And have you been here when some of the activities are going on during the summer at the Village Green?
I've been there during, so my dad plays in a jazz band, and I think his band has played there, so I've been there for that as well. But I think it's, it definitely reaffirms the point that we want to make sure that we keep the flow and the openness as open as possible, because your street and your downtown changes seasonally whenever there's events, whenever it's a lovely Saturday afternoon and you've got a ton of bikes, using the downtown. So we want to make sure that we're very careful and very deliberate and not doing too much. Again, back to Bob's original comments, less is more.
I didn't invent that.
Bob, I see we have two people who want to speak, Susie McMurray and Mike Dorniker. Should we go to them at this point?
Oh, okay, well, they did, but yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah.
I see hands are raised.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Well.
Okay, go ahead, Susie.
Well, I don't know how to unraise my hand. I already spoke, so I'm okay.
Okay.
I just had one question.
I did it.
Yeah.
So, actually on this one you have up here on the screen, one of the challenges we faced on Block 1 with spacing, talking about bikes and stuff, is we try to have, obviously our table setup layout is significantly different now than it would normally be. And so we try to do during normal times is tables of 4 kind of, actually, if you could go back to that other drawing.
Sure.
Thank you. So what we try to do is have tables of 4 kind of on the street and then tables of 2 up along the building itself. So to be enough for a family with a wagon or bikes to kind of travel. So in this drawing here, what is kind of the general spacing of these tables here by the wine and beer shop?
Sure. And, and again, this is not intended to say that the wine and beer shop has to put their seating out that way. We were just testing it. But, as far as our streetscape design standards go, absolutely, we never want to see anything that's less than 6 foot of passable area. So, I bet that this is much more than that, because the parking space is 10 foot wide. So this passable area is probably closer to 8 or 9 feet.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think if you look there right now, you'll see that they have out on the outer ring there. I just went down there this afternoon. It looked like they had 4 places out there, 4 tops, and nothing along the wall yet.
Mm-hmm.
But people move those tables all over the place.
Sure. And, Lake Bluff is really blessed that it has really wide sidewalks. So many communities, really work hard to get this when they haven't been built that way. So it was very smart of whomever way back long ago to develop the sidewalk this way.
Okay, anything else?
Regarding the parking issue, I'd like to reference a letter from Mark Stolzenberg where he suggested using some of the old parking lots in Block 3 so that we would not be disturbing old growth trees in some of the other suggested areas.
Drew, are you there? I know, that's an issue between the landowner and the village. And Drew, are you still there?
Sorry. Yeah, I was trying to get to my mute button. I am. Can I share my screen really quick, Jody, please?
Of course.
So I saw Mr. Stolzenberg's letter and Mrs. Briand's as well. Similar. So this is Block 3, and I believe the idea of the eastern side of this. This is R4 zoning. One of the I guess really the vision that the Plan Commission Zoning Board of Appeals has adopted for this particular area is.
Everyone else see the shared screen?
No.
Oh, there we go.
So, so this is a recent amendment, recent being 2016, to the 1997 Comprehensive Land Use Plan of the Village. And actually, Jody was the planner that helped with this when this is put together. This was a result of actually a appearance preference review of our central business district, and resulted in not in the village adopting design preferences, but rather amending its comprehensive land use plan to talk about how Block 3 would be handled with incoming developments. But the short answer is, if you look bullet number 3 here, it talks about Block 3 should be treated as a residential transition between the central business district to the west and scale to the surrounding neighborhoods. The idea that the land, the ultimate vision for the property is to be residential transition, right? Because it's complicated because the west side of the property where the bank sits is central business district zoning. The east side, the other two lots, is R4, and which makes for a very clunky transition. Not to mention that it's a very small area to try to transition in, right? It's such a small footprint. It's difficult to do it well, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of these projects that have come in to try to be economically viable at the same time, provide a smooth transition, it just hasn't been a good, the right project I don't think has been seen yet by the community. But to the point of this is, so the highest and best use of this property is not foreseen as to be parking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Mr. Bailey from the library talked about it earlier. The land basis cost makes this pretty difficult, even though the existing infrastructure is there to turn it into parking. It's pretty pricey, and the idea of the village acquiring this property for that purpose, the marginal cost of even adding the 9 stalls as part of this project is just an extra paint, right? That is a lot less of an investment for the village than to acquire this property, which ultimately its vision is not to keep it a parking lot. So the idea for the village adopting for that purpose would be it would go against its own policy.
Okay. Drew, it's Susie. I have a question.
Yeah.
Why couldn't you just stripe it and use it and rent the property until they sell it for whatever? I mean, is it too much a liability, or what's the deal?
Even right before the PNC sold it, I had negotiated an agreement for that very use, and I had it going to the village board agenda, and I had to pull it off the agenda because they sold the property.
Okay.
The owners has been trying to, haven't been motivated to work with the village on that.
Well, they could be making money in the meantime. That's all I'm saying, is that if they were good business people, they would stripe it and use it as a parking lot until they sold it to whomever's going to develop it ultimately.
Not arguing with you.
That's what I would do.
Well, maybe you should acquire it and get into business with the village.
I can't do that. Sorry.
Yeah.
That answer your question, Cherie?
Yes.
Just one thing on concept 2. It seems that though this group anyway is unanimous in not pursuing concept 2, and is the village board expecting us to report back some information, or so that this doesn't get any, as far as we're concerned, doesn't get pursued any farther?
What I think, and I talked about this earlier in the day with Jody, is the village is trying to get this project completed in the fall, and so I'm trying to develop a shopping list. So what materials do we purchase? What amenities are we looking for? And so to answer your question, the primary issue is you've eliminated this alternative, at least in your perspective. I will report that back to the village board, and they'll take your recommendation and give direction to staff on how they want to see the project. But the idea of the trade-off for the parking versus the pedestrian improvements, the board will take all that into consideration, Bob. So you answered the question. They wanted your recommendation, and sounds like you're prepared to give it, and that the two-way street is preferred.
Yeah, we don't need to formalize that, do we?
No, I'm going to wrap all this together, and I know I'm hoping. I know it's already 8 o'clock, and you guys started earlier, but to the extent that we can, I know Jody is trying to get to the point where she can have a refined plan to share with you all next month.
That'd be great.
And so, I just a couple clarifying points, Jody. I don't know if you have any, but I had a few.
Go for it, Drew.
So one, we talked about materials, and I had a question from John DeRossi had asked about the sidewalk materials. Would it be brick or would it be concrete? Jody talked about different treatments at the joints that you can do, and to have single material. And I had a conversation with I'm trying to see if Rob's still on the call. No, he left. He and I had a contact. I don't know, a month ago, we were talking about how Block 1, like you said, Bob, was a bit of a pilot project and see how it worked. But we know that the mix of materials that during the winter they move at different paces, right? In the freeze thaw, and it's not been pretty. So the idea, I think, from a maintenance perspective, and even when you have to go back and do repairs of concrete or other areas, the idea of uniform material, and the fewer materials, the better from a maintenance and from the village's perspective. So if you all are saying that all this can be concrete, and maybe it is somewhat, there's some, I don't know, decorative treatments to it, as Jody's describing, but it is a single material versus maybe, just like you said, Bob, the brick at the crossing, carrying that element out and across, and maybe at the other crossings. If we can maybe narrow that down for Jody so she can help out. And again, I guess building on Rob's point earlier too is, think about that, and how would you want that to look on Block 1 and on Blocks, 3? Where would you like to see those same elements repeated? Because if we're going to start putting this concept to work, and we're hearing from businesses that they want, these improvements, these new amenities extended on the other blocks, I guess we need to be sure what we're doing here would make sense on all these other blocks as well.
Well, in my opinion, it does, just like I thought it did when we did Block 1, which was a failure of material. But no, I agree with that, and I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I mean, to that point, Bob, would you be looking to create a brick crossing from, let's say, where the B Market is to the Village Green?
I know they look cool, but a brick crossing just does not work well with snow trucks.
Maybe I misunderstood what you were talking about at the Scranton Alley. Then you were saying just the brick only continues to the end of the bump out.
Yeah, to the end of the bump out, and then it picks up. But then you do. I mean, if you ever look down at some of the intersections in New York City, they do their stripes. They do all kinds of wild patterns, and instead of just the regular, walking stripes that everybody else does, they do crosshairs. It's really neat, and it's just a matter of paint.
So you can do some pretty amazing things with traffic paint, and
absolutely.
We're working on a project in Lincoln Square in the Chicago neighborhood where a mural artist has done some amazing things with traffic paint that I can share. But separately, the way that I interpreted it when we were discussing this earlier, Drew, was that it could look something similar to what this top image looks like, where it's a broom finished concrete with an interesting joint pattern, and then a brick ribbon along the back of curb that would be installed on a concrete base. And then there would be a painted mid-block crosswalk, and then, that would pick up on the other side. Whereas I think the other thing we talked about too, and Chair Hunter, tell me if I'm correct, is that at the mid-block crossing, we would continue the brick itself in that whole mid-block.
Well, no, that's why I'm saying I would if you didn't have snow. If you didn't have snow trucks.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Public Works doesn't like brick. They don't like
on
corners.
The sidewalk?
Well, no.
I think if it was just the area, if it was coming out of the alley and continue that through, I think the brick ban would give Public Works heartburn unless you guys really wanted to do it. I mean, are you?
That's my point. Yeah, I think it would.
Yeah.
If they get heartburn, then they lower the shovel when they get to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to it.
I don't want to speak for the rest of the members. Is the rest of the ABR comfortable with the idea of this being like Jody has shown it, it's concrete, but then the only decorative brick would be at the crossing coming out of the alley?
Well, and probably down there at the Innovasi corner, and maybe depending on the pattern of what evolves at the Buffington corner, if there's some way to do it there. Just judiciously, it'd be like 3 points where here's where you go, here's where you cross.
And then across the street as well?
Maybe.
The north side of the street?
Just a little.
Like the landing?
Would you carry it all the way over to in front of B Market to the park?
I don't know if this is coming through.
I'm just saying, if you're going to do that, just that block 2, why wouldn't you do block 1 and make the crossing thing? If you're going to incorporate everything and make it look alike.
Oh, well, I don't think that's going to fit into the project right now.
Yeah. Okay.
But long term.
But in the future.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's possible. That's possible. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That was my point. Is if you like it, just let's try to be sure we like it everywhere. Right.
Right. I mean, can you all see what I've just doodled?
Yeah.
I mean, does that all kind of make sense? And so I heard Bluffington's that we can expand this bump out, and I appreciate Bob's comment about making it a snowplow friendly
well, and the point
bump out.
Anyway, they look funny in plan, and anything that looks funny in plan is going to look funny. Period. So.
And we don't really care what it looks like in plan, but we want to make sure that it's functional and that it gets enough seating. Because if we did this here at the east end, we would get a lot more space for tables and chairs.
Yeah.
And then,
so,
all right, thank you for that.
Wait, before you go off of paving, can I just confirm? So what I heard was, the brick paving at the mid blocks, the end points. How about the ribbon? Did we say no to the brick paving on the ribbon?
I think it's something we don't need to do.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Especially where you have diagonal parking, that car's covering it anyways for the most part.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
And one more thing we should clarify too, Jody, is how the tree wells. So, like one of the things we've talked about, like if the village was going to do concept 2, and it doesn't sound like that's what. Well, I know you're not recommending that, but that was going to take out the trees. And so what we're talking about now is leaving the tree wells exactly like they are. And so the goal would be to build all this around the existing trees so that they would remain as you see them today.
That's correct. And so that's something that we're doing in Wilmette right now, where we've protected all the trees that we can. There are a lot of tree protection measures that need to be put into place to make sure they survive construction, so we would recommend that. The tree wells should be the same as what they are today. And yes, I wouldn't recommend trying to fit tree grates around them, because with the root flare and the elevation change, it just won't work out so well.
And in a perfect world, we would, but we don't want to, right now's not the time to do it because we don't want to destroy the trees.
Yeah, I think so.
So that was the material issue. And then, so can we talk about the pedestrian seating opportunities, the bench versus the seat wall?
Yeah, let me get to that.
Because I know the seat walls are the element that's out in the area across from the village hall area, right, where the fountain is, and the idea, did you want to repeat that element? I mean, it's a bit of a hodgepodge. Village Green has a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. They have, a seat wall. They've also, there's benches. So the idea of seating, do you have a preference? Obviously, the brick is more expensive, but again, it's more consistent with some other.
I think when the brick is part of an overall pattern of that, if you look at any one of those corners, that's a whole unit, and the brick is a part of that. It's part of all the elements, and the seat wall just becomes something that's glued on. no matter how cool the seats may be. That's my opinion of I don't mean the seat wall, I mean the furniture becomes sort of glued on. It's a kit of parts then. My opinion. Anybody else?
Yeah, I like the brick wall. I think it's a little bit more elevated, a little more sophisticated. And it serves a purpose to define the planting areas without worrying about some kind of walking damage on them.
You know, and I can just reiterate, in my opinion, I prefer the seat walls to benches, because when a bench is sitting vacant, it looks like a vacant bench. And when it's a seat wall, it looks like, you know, it's a sculptural element. So,
Wall is the secondary
really nice.
use.
Yeah.
I have a problem with the brick surface on the top. After a few years of going through a winter, usually it's going to get stuff in, you know, ice and stuff in between the bricks, and they're going to deteriorate quicker than you can imagine.
Oh,
yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a good picture to explain, but I think what we would recommend in that case is it would be a brick wall with a limestone cap, or it could be a limestone cap with a, so if anybody goes to Tudor Court in Glencoe, there are these benches and they have different forms. In some places they're sit on top of a precast or a cast in place retaining wall. So it could have a wood seat and back. It could have just the limestone cap, but agree, it should not be brick at the surface.
Jody, can I share?
Oh, yeah.
What happened?
No, I'm going to share. I wanted to show what I think what we're talking about here. This is right in front of the Village Hall, the fountain.
Yeah, that's got a limestone cap with piers.
Yeah, and the same, it's hard to see, but it's here as well.
Yeah, behind the
yeah.
meeting. Right.
And those look like those are rock-faced pier caps and wall caps, which has a really nice appearance to it.
Yeah.
These are, you know, different, but existing. You know, there's stone with, I think it's I don't know if it's slate or bluestone on top. So.
It'd be nice to have continuity.
Agreed.
That's a great point. Can I ask a couple of shopping list questions?
Sure.
Okay, I think so. We have consensus on the two-way system for parking. The lighting, festoon lighting. I heard good feedback about festoon lighting. I think I heard some comments that said it was preferred to be over the sidewalk, not over the road. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, I think so. Somebody else chime in.
I agree. I think I would prefer not over the road.
Thank you. I'll keep moving on, but feel free to come back to lighting if someone needs to. My other one was I heard good support for the mid-block crosswalks, so I think we can go ahead and include those. And then I heard some support about expanding the bump out near Bluffington, considering that in the future there might be other uses that would do business past 3 p.m., but to do the bump outs in such a way that we're friendly to the snowplows.
Yes, and the same bump out is down there at the Scranton Alley too. The same 3D thing, yeah.
Correct. Thank you.
Bike racks and planter pots are all that's left on my list.
Drew is thorough. Here, let me, I can share my screen if you guys want to look at those. I did have an idea about bike racks, and you can all tell me what you think.
This goes back to Chair Hunter, you may recall, back with even the original concept plan, you talked about you wanted bike racks, you wanted that they would be painted black, but they never really settled on the actual, what it should look like, right?
Right.
I can just kind of throw out a couple of ideas and you can tell me what you think. You know, these are upside down U-racks in Evanston. They're very common everywhere. They could have a branding element to them if you wanted to have something that said like Bluff, for instance. Another optional rack, if you can see these, I know it's a little far away, but these are bike racks that are bike bollards, and so they have a slimmer appearance, but it has a very simple ring that gets attached to the bollard, and it has just a nice, you know, simple design to it. And you know, you want something that doesn't take up too much space, but still kind of does the trick and giving people a place to lock their bikes to.
Well, mostly, either a lot of bikes or kids throwing their bikes on the ground next to the rack.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, that tends to always happen no matter how many bike racks you have.
With the proposed bike rack over there by Hub and Cycle, is the Hub and Cycle bike rack that's out there, is that theirs and they own it, or is that the city's or the village's?
They own it, Julie.
Okay, so are we proposing replacing it and having it be used for everybody, or is it going to be for their use, for them to park their bikes and their merchandise, or how's that going to work?
It's been communal from the get-go. That was part of the deal. It was with the previous owners back when it was Activator Cycles. When it was in, it was on the condition that anybody could use it, and that's how it's been working over the years.
And it's worked out okay. It's just an ugly rack.
Yeah.
Are we proposing then to replace that with whatever we're selecting here, or future selection? Or does that stay no matter what we do?
Our proposal was to put something back that has a black appearance, you know, to match the light poles and the rest of the furnishing, so it has a little bit more of a finished appearance, and something that would be anchored to the ground rather than loose. You know, so that was our recommendation, but of course it's a kind of a minor detail that we could go either way. It doesn't make a tremendous difference to the streetscape.
If you have a preference, that's great. We'd love to hear it. Alternatively, I think Jody and I can go over and meet with Hub and Cycle folks and have a conversation with them.
Well, that's not the only rack in town. You know, there's racks down at Bluffington's, there's the ones over across the street in Block 1. They're kind of around. There's some at the library, and they're all like, they were dragged out of the junkyard.
Well, only one of them was dragged. The one in front of Hub and Cycle is private, I will say. It's not public. The rest are public.
But again, continuity throughout the village on this kind of furniture is, I think, is now the devil is in the details.
Exactly.
And we know you didn't make up that quote either.
Oh yeah, but give me some credit somehow.
Mr. Vanderoe.
Yeah.
Member Waymire, you're an active cyclist. Do you have any preferences on which type you use?
I think the ones that are going to be easiest for the kids to try to park their bikes at are going to be the best ones. Probably not the bollards, as much as those are low profile and they look nice. I think they might be confusing for children to try to figure out how to park their bikes at. So maybe going with something that really lends itself to I'll park my bike here and it's going to be really easy is the best way to do it, to try to organize those kids and perhaps some of the adults that ride bikes.
So something like what's there now, essentially just maybe one-sided as opposed to, some of them are two-sided and they don't function well. But something like that, that's simple to slide your tire into, because most people don't even lock their bikes that I see.
I agree. Yeah, I think that that's probably the way to go, and you know, that doesn't take up too much extra room, but something that's easy and black and painted nice and doesn't look like it came from the junkyard.
I mean, the thing with bike rack storage is that a lot of people want to be able to lock their front wheel to their frame, and so the U-racks, you know, allow for that. That said, I know that a lot of people that ride really fancy racing bikes won't even lock them either. They'll just lean them up against the cafe where they're sitting so they can keep an eye on it. Yeah. So, you know, it's tough to satisfy all the different types of bikers.
I've never seen a bike locked here. I don't know if I've.
That's interesting.
Oh, I see lots of them. They're wrapped around the seat.
They are. Right. Yeah, they're given for Christmas and never used.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not that I mean, they leave their backpacks on the steps of B Market for the afternoon. It's just the mentality's not there to lock up personal items, except at the train station.
That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah.
Well, can we see I mean, is this a detail that we're going to get solved tonight?
No, but Jody and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, and I can just offer one really simple thing. As far as bike racks go, they're typically just anchor bolted to the sidewalk. They don't even have to be anything that gets decided until after the sidewalk is installed.
Right,
it's definitely a very last thing, for sure. No foundation needed for those.
I have a daughter-in-law who's a welder, and she has made very cool decorative bike racks for people before. I think you might find a local artist who could make you something that's unique to Lake Bluff, that's still like a U-rack that might be very creative. But I wouldn't know where to start looking for them.
That's a cool idea. I mean, there's lots of other really nice, colorful bike racks and lively sculptural type things out there. But I think that would be cool.
Planter pots? I think everybody knows we've got the planter pots that are actually the planter beds. They're large, I'll call them flower boxes that are some sort of cast material that are in and around the central business district already, that the village has purchased working with the garden club, and the idea of, those things, they're probably approaching 10 or 15 years of age, and they won't last forever. So the idea of the pots, we could do those.
Drew, you're talking about pots like this one that's pictured here by Buffington?
That is
one of them. And then there's round ones.
There's lots of different kinds out there. I mean, I think you can just barely see past Scranton Alley here. There's another kind of a pot. And I think these pots that are up against the storefronts, we would recommend letting them stay if they can, and encouraging businesses to do their own planter pots. As far as the planter pots that we were starting to show on the concept plans, we were looking at things that would be a little bit larger, that would be used to better define where cars go and where people go. So, for instance, and I know this isn't the right pot for Lake Bluff, but this is Evanston's standard pot. And so they're placed close to the mid-block crossing, close to the curb, so that cars know that this is not a place for cars to go. These balls do a similar function, although I don't think they're right for Lake Bluff either. But, in Winnetka, these are precast concrete planter pots. I wouldn't say the same one, but I would say that to put a planter pot close to a curb, we would want to have something that's very durable and fairly large, so that people can see them if they're driving in their cars, and it kind of creates more of that street edge that we're trying to create here on the street.
Well, let me fill you in on how those planter pots work, because the garden club 4 times a year plants those with a theme, and my wife and myself do the ones on either side of Lady Bird, so I've got real experience in doing that, chopping knife and everything else with those things. So that's how those things happen. And the village provides the pots and the dirt, and they clean them out. And I don't know who pays for the plants, Drew. Does the village pay for the plants?
Yeah.
And the garden club says this is what we want to put in, and the village orders it, and there we go.
I think that's a great program. I mean, they really lend character to the street, and I mean, if there's interest, we would encourage that to continue.
Well, it's been going on for ever since the pots showed up.
But if the group likes this idea of, precast concrete planter pots that are, a little bit larger and closer to the curb to help define those spaces and separate people from cars, we can offer up some suggestions, alternative styles for staff to look at.
Yeah. Again, we're in the details right now, and I don't know how far you want to go with that right now.
I had one more detailed question, just for going back to my list. The festoon lighting by Bluffington's on the south side, when you increase the sidewalk, I just want to make sure that the the consensus was to include festoon lighting at that corner.
I think so, yeah.
That's an affirmative? Okay.
That's my opinion.
And I think along that same theme, we heard that there was good feedback about taking the banners off of the light poles and mounting them to the festoons and using an integrated banner attachment for the banners on the festoons.
I think that's the best thing to do. I mean, my recollection is you could buy the pole with a hole in it and the rod would go through the hole. We didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, so when we do festoon lighting, there's a lot of engineering that goes into making sure that it can hold the load of the festoon wires, if they have birds on them and all that other stuff. But we would also ask the lighting manufacturer to incorporate calculations for banners on probably both sides, just to make sure we have that baked in. Whether or not you put banners on both sides, I think it would be useful to have that structural capacity.
Yeah.
Jody, one more thing. I know this is probably going to be, I'll be greeted with stones, pitchforks, and torches, but I'm going to throw it out there just because it's worth saying since it's the planning period. But I think there's a park in Springfield, Illinois that has festoon lighting that has the ability to change colors.
I was wondering if that was going to come up. Yes.
Well, now's the time to ask the question. I'm not suggesting it, but it's my understanding you can change pretty much to any color under the rainbow, yes?
So I can tell you a little bit about that. We haven't actually spec'd them that have been installed, but we've researched it. The way I understand it is that the color changing bulbs need to have a very different controller and system than just the white bulbs. And so if you want color, you need to kind of bake that in from the very beginning. But yeah, it's an option for sure. You know, visually, I think in my opinion, I think the simple, you know, white light glow looks nicer, but it's completely up to you all.
I'm with you.
So it goes the way of the one-way street. Understood. That's fine. I want to throw it out there.
I'm glad you talked about it, though, because I meant to ask the question as well. Better to figure it out now.
And then also all these opportunities, I don't know if you created by doing the Bluffington bump out additional, does that create another opportunity for another tree, Jody?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think so. We probably want to just check our vision cones. We might not want to put a tree there just so that we make sure we have good visibility, but we can take a look at it.
Because I mean, this was interesting to me because it was already a net 5 for trees. You know, you're adding more tree spots, so.
Yeah. I mean, we'll look at what's a good pattern.
Last forever.
Sorry, what was that, Chair Hunter?
I said some of those trees maybe are, you know, more short-lived than other ones.
True.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a big ash tree here that I understood had been inoculated for the borer, but that one probably won't have a very long life. I mean, if you look at the pattern of the festoons, we really need to make sure we steer clear of the trees. So it would probably be a version of this, you know, down here at Bluffington, a smaller version.
For some of the trees that within a few years might go, if we replace the trees, would it make sense to put grates around them at that time?
That's something to think about. I mean, I think, you know, the trees are all very different sizes right now, and so if you did something like that, you would have a pattern of some trees with grates and some trees without, but you do have the precedent of having tree grates on block 1, so you know, and it's a nice tree grate. It's a good finish. It's a good quality product. So we're not opposed to incorporating them with new trees.
That's my shopping list.
Does anybody else have any other comments, or anybody in the audience have any comments? Because if not, we could maybe wrap. Oh no, we can't wrap this up. We got more stuff to talk about.
Yep, we have 2 more items on our agenda. Nobody has their hands raised for the current one, though.
Nobody has their hands raised?
Correct.
Okay.
Jody, do you want to stick around for the mural? It'll be short, I imagine.
I'll try and stick around for a little bit, but I might have to hop off. But I just want to thank you all for sticking with me and talking through all of this. I mean, what we got through tonight is probably what takes other communities, 3 months. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jody. It was great. Okay, so I don't even have my agenda anymore, but what's next? The murals?
Okay,
Mike?
yeah, we have item number 6, a discussion of possible murals downtown. The Lake Bluff 125 committee is considering installing temporary murals to continue the celebration of the village's Quasqui Centennial. And Pam Russell from the committee is here to talk to us about it.
Okay.
I'm part of a subcommittee of the 125 committee, and last year we did the Dogs on the Bluff, which was received very well. We wanted to continue kind of that feeling with the public art project this year, and we've come up with a couple concepts and locations for outdoor murals or wall art, and I think, Drew, can you post those or show those?
Let's see, let me see if I didn't, oh, maybe Drew's got it. Okay, good.
Okay. Sort of a mix of concepts. This is the library's west wall. These would be cutout figures. This is a very crude representation, but the idea we've got is that people can take selfies and photographs with the art that's out there. So these would be historic figures, cutouts, given some dimensionality as they're mounted to the wall. And you see we have a model there giving the scale.
Is that live person in there, George?
Yes, it is. my willing model.
Fortunately, with COVID, he was not working in New York or Milan at the time and was willing to put in his time here.
That's right.
So when you say they're cutouts, or say that?
For this concept, and we've got three different concepts. This would be the images printed on Sintra, which is a PVC type material. We use it for lots of our museum displays.
Yeah.
And they would be cut out much more perfectly than my crude cutouts here. And then mounted to the brick wall for, the bathers, the other one, we envision that having more dimensionality where we'd cut out maybe 3 or 4 groupings of the figures so that we could set them at different distances from the wall. So,
kind of neat and kind of spooky.
So I think the Close family, the other one with the cow, is a little bit more spooky, but
don't want to scare small children.
Right. So we thought that would be fun, and the way there's about, I think, a foot of soil there between the sidewalk and the building wall. You can't really see that here, but it would be in that space.
How would you attach them?
Just with screws into the wall.
Oh, okay. Very
into
thorough.
the mortar. So the material's like 6 millimeters. It would be firm enough to stand up there. So
Anybody have any other comments? It's just a funky idea.
Let me show you the other concept, and then I'll describe the third one for now. So this graphic was created for the 125. It's on a lot of the apparel that we're selling for the 125 committee. This particular one, some color's been added. I don't know what the final version would be, but the letters are made out of all the street names in Lake Bluff.
Huh.
So our concept here, this particular, it would be 2 signs, each 5 by 10 on that same material. So it's 20 feet long, about 5 feet tall, and so people can point to their street name and take their picture or whatever they want to do there.
So is that in the alley?
That's on the east wall of B Market,
Okay,
between Hansa and the window.
yeah.
So the scale, I think it's about 22 feet from the window to the downspout. So it's not totally accurate, but close. And then the third idea, and I'll explain them and you can ask questions then, would be a painted mural. And we looked around town as we were coming up with these concepts for appropriate walls, and that was hard to find. The Walnut Building is the one location, the building that the city owns and uses for storage across from Hansa is what we are thinking would be the best possibility because it's already a painted building. So in our committee the other night, we talked about two possibilities. This wall, which is the south wall, or also painting the west wall with the stairs and the garage door. And Sandy Bacon, who's probably also on this call, she's the artist she'll come up and with the design, and we see this as having volunteers participating in painting the mural under her guidance. But
that could be interesting.
So those are the three locations that made the most sense to us, and three of the ideas we've come up with. We're open to other possibilities too. But we wanted to get your thoughts and input so we could tweak the idea. And we've talked to Rob Douglas and we've talked to Eric Bailey, and they're supportive of the idea on their buildings.
I said I would defer to you all for the wall of that building.
Library is very excited. Pam sent me the mock-up. I think it looks really cool. We're excited to participate.
Pam, how long would these be up?
We're envisioning through the summer, through like September into October. The 125 celebration is September 25th, so we'd like to have them up through September anyway.
And what about the mural that would go on the building? Because that's more permanent.
Right. We could either leave it to fade or we could paint it back white. And the other possibility is doing it on some material that's attached, but we like the texture of the bricks and thought it would be neat to do it, paint it right on the surface.
I like the idea of it being, I like the whole concept. I think it's fun. The only concern I have is with the mural, if we were to decide to leave it up there long term, is typically when I go out to other cities, villages in central Illinois and west between here and Iowa, you get into the small cities and you see that they've painted murals all over the place, and it's the one thing that they've thought of that will attract people to move to their community. And they're usually poor communities and rural that are not doing well. And I just wouldn't want to see it be permanent because it carries that stigma with it. But for a temporary thing, I think it's absolutely great.
Will there be a sign or something to identify what that mural or artwork is there for, the purpose?
Yes. But that's, the details of that we haven't worked out. I think even one possibility is like a QR code too that links to more information, to have a sticker or something that's simple there.
Yeah, Charleston, South Carolina, during their anniversary, they took a Victorian, one of their Victorian homes, and then took the army the pattern of camouflage, and then painted the house in all the approved historic colors within that camouflage. So it'd be interesting. I mean, we don't have that history, but it's fun to kind of turn on something that your village is known for, a history of, to be a little bit more progressive about it. So, kind of like what you're doing with the cows, it's a nice kind of cheeky thing. So I think sometimes that's more successful than trying to do like a streetscape on the side of a wall or something. Do something that's really bold and big, so that it kind of stands on its own. I think the one thing with the library is if you're truly wanting people to take pictures with that, is like making sure that becomes that, a lot of times when you see those huge, like butterfly wings, or angel wings that people stand in front of, they're like 30 feet. It's a very strong statement. I think you'd want to go bold, is guess what I'm saying. If we're going to do this, don't do the little, don't do something humble and small. Let's go bold with them. And I think you are, I like that, but I'm just saying there's good opportunities to do something great instead of something that is kind of safe and maybe gets kind of boring after a while. Not boring, but I think we want it to be good for, if it's there
to
for
have
4
the
months,
impact.
something
Yeah.
big. Do something big for 4 months.
That's great. And the other idea when you're talking about drawing in Lake Bluff is a fourth idea we have is taking the Lake Bluff logo with the dog chasing the figure and leave the figure out so that people can be
the person
imposing themselves in it.
That's good.
But
I was just going to say, I think it's a great idea. I would love to see more locations, and whatever you can do to secure additional locations around the community would be awesome. Any other places downtown that have those opportunities it would be someplace for people to see that and still be safe to take pictures.
well, that's wonderful. We would love to do that. So if
Yeah,
anyone
I
has
agree
ideas,
with that.
please send them, share them.
I would like to see something on the blockhouse as a permanent thing. And I don't, maybe that's out of line, but that's kind of like a big canvas waiting to be tackled. With as Matt says, big bowls there. Doesn't have to be.
I'm surprised you didn't say camouflage the building using camouflage.
Yeah.
That's the most attractive structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you thought about doing anything with the gazebo, since that's such the marker of the town? If it's, I talked about tying the festoon lights to it, but maybe there's something else we do with it for the, I don't know what it is, but maybe that's, even if it's painted a different thing, and it can always be painted pack white, but something. I think to me, that's the heart of the village, and maybe we do something with that for a while. It's kind of a boring,
It's a pretty unremarkable gazebo.
Old story, the gazebo. I think I would want to start a petition to change it, but I don't do that right now. But maybe we do something to it for the anniversary.
So you'd be supportive of painting it for this temporary?
I'd be supportive of doing anything to it. I'm all for making that thing way more amazing than it is. It's kind of a tight little thing. I think it could address the community better, but that's a different conversation.
Any other ideas? We'll brainstorm and come up with them.
Hey, I'll plant a seed. If you ever drive over the Green Bay Road Bridge, if you've noticed that bridge actually glued onto the side is the old bridge.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Do you guys know about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the old metal bridge. Bob, you could probably tell the story better than I can. But that was done to have, I presume at the time, to try to address the historic nature of the bridge, historic, that they just did that. And now the village is working with IDOT as part of our plans to redo Green Bay Road. The state is really giving us a hard time because we were going to redo the bridge and make it look like the Moffett Road Bridge, which we think is lovely, right? That was one that you all worked on years ago. But they're really leaning on us to try to find ways to repurpose the old bridge. So if you can look at that, the metal structures there, and say, how can we repurpose this or redo something on, with the village green or with the gazebo or, something, have at it. So open to ideas for that. I know that's a little off topic, but it's kind of on Matt's idea of let's think big and bold.
All right, we love it.
Yeah, there's a competition every year called the Serpentine. I forget. Bob, do you know what city that's in? I think it's like in Belgium, and every year an architect, some famous architect, and it creates a path like in this area.
Yeah.
And it'd be kind of cool to maybe use those to create some kind of pathway, something interactive with that,
Well, we talked about this about 6 months ago.
We did, right. I you guys did, yeah.
I got all kinds of ideas about, huh?
Yeah.
Heard anything? You guys got to go keep thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, every time I go across that bridge, I got another idea of what to do with those things, you know.
Send them. Text me.
Well, I don't think you want one in your driveway.
That's true. Anyway, all right. Pam, I think you got what you were looking for.
Yep, thank you. And if you have other ideas or suggestions, send them our way.
Okay.
We'll try to go big and go bold.
Yes, excellent.
Great. Thank you very much.
My apologies and thanks to everybody in the ABR for tonight. I think you guys didn't know you were running a marathon tonight. It wasn't a sprint.
Well, we would.
We're not done yet. We got one more item.
Yep, we do.
I'm done. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time.
Drew, you're not going to stay around for the library parking lot?
This one might be fast.
I think it'll be fast.
Yeah, probably. I hope. Have a good night.
Okay, bye, Drew.
Okay, well, item 7 is a public hearing to review alterations to the site plan for the Lake Bluff Library parking lot. You guys received, I forwarded on emails and letters from 2 people, Stan Hong of 104 East Scranton, who asked about enforcement of the hours of construction, which I told him we would certainly do. And then a email from Bob Broughton, who lives at 130 East Center, but was in Florida at the moment and wasn't sure exactly where the peninsula was in relation to his spruce trees. And I assured him it's actually directly behind his garage, so not behind the spruce trees. So obviously Eric Bailey is here to, the library director is here to discuss this item with us. And it's a public hearing, so I guess, Bob, we should swear him in.
Yeah, okay. Can you do that? Because I forgot.
Sure. Eric, do you swear to tell